Hey everyone, tonight we're stepping into a world where medicine was more likely to kill you than cure you, where the smell of blood mixed with prayers, and your doctor's best tool was a sharp blade and an unwavering belief in theories that were completely, catastrophically wrong. So before we begin, take a moment to like this video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe grab some headphones for that immersive experience, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Picture this. It's the year 1347, somewhere in a cramped medieval town, where the streets smell like a mixture of human waste, rotting food, and desperation. You wake up one morning with a fever. Your head pounds. Your skin burns. Your throat feels like you've been swallowing broken glass. In 2025, you'd take some ibuprofen, drink water, maybe see a doctor if it got bad. You'd get a prescription, rest up, and probably be fine in a week. In 1347, you're about to enter a nightmare. Your family, worried and helpless, calls for the local physician. He arrives wearing a long robe that hasn't been washed in months, maybe years. The fabric is stained with the blood of his previous patients, a grim resume of his medical career. He doesn't wash his hands. Why would he? The concept of germs won't be discovered for another 500 years. He looks at you the way a butcher examines a pig at market, calculating, detached, already planning his approach. Welcome to the medieval clinic, my friend. There's no reception desk, no insurance forms, no cheerful nurse to take your vitals. Just a dark room with a wooden table, leather straps hanging ominously from the sides, and a bucket positioned strategically beneath. The air is thick with smoke from herbs burning in a corner. A futile attempt to ward off evil spirits that don't exist while ignoring the very real bacteria that do. The doctor has read exactly 3 books in his entire career, all of them written by men who'd been dead for 1,000 years. Galen, Hippocrates, Avicenna, brilliant minds for their time, catastrophically outdated by the 14th century. But these texts are gospel. They explain that your body is governed by 4 humors, 4 fundamental fluids that must remain in perfect balance for you to stay healthy. Blood, yellow bile, black bile, phlegm. It's an elegant theory. Poetic, even. The only problem? It's completely wrong. But your doctor doesn't know that. Nobody does. So when he examines you, running his unwashed hands over your feverish skin, feeling your racing pulse, peering at your tongue and eyes, he's not looking for a virus or bacterial infection. He's trying to determine which of your humors has become excessive. Too much blood? That would explain the fever, the flushed skin, the rapid heartbeat. The diagnosis seems obvious to him. Your body is overheating because you have too much hot, wet blood coursing through your veins. The treatment is equally obvious. He needs to remove the excess. You're strapped to the table now. Not tightly, your doctor assures you. Just enough to keep you from making any sudden movements that might disrupt the procedure. The leather bites into your wrists and ankles. Your heart races. Not from fever anymore, but from pure, primal fear, because you can see what's coming. The blade glints in the candlelight, small and sharp and cold. Your doctor selects a vein in your forearm with practiced precision. He's done this thousands of times. He knows exactly where to cut, how deep to go, how much blood to take. The cut is quick. You barely feel it at first. Just a sharp sting that's almost immediately overwhelmed by a strange sensation of warmth spreading down your arm. Your blood, dark and vital, begins to drip into the wooden bowl positioned beneath your arm. Drip, drip, drip. Your doctor watches with the focused attention of an artist evaluating his work. The rhythm of your blood hitting the bowl is almost musical to him, a sign that his treatment is working, that the bad humors are leaving your body, that healing has begun. If you sneezed, bled, or cried, they called it progress. He's muttering something under his breath, half prayer, half medical incantation, asking God to guide his hands, to bless this treatment, to drive out the sickness that has taken hold of you. Because medieval medicine wasn't just a science, it was a spiritual practice. Illness was often seen as divine punishment, and healing required both physical intervention and holy intervention. You feel lightheaded now. The room starts to swim. Your doctor notices and nods approvingly. Good, he says. The fever is leaving your body with the excess blood. You're being purified. Actually, you're just losing blood. Your body, already weakened by whatever illness brought you here, is now dealing with the additional stress of hypovolemia, the medical term for not having enough blood. Your heart is working overtime, trying to pump what little blood remains through your system. Your blood pressure is dropping. Your organs are starting to receive less oxygen, but your doctor doesn't know any of this. He can't see the microscopic battle your immune system is fighting. He doesn't understand that your fever is actually a defensive response, your body raising its temperature to create an inhospitable environment for whatever pathogen has invaded you. He doesn't know that by draining your blood, he's robbing your body of the very resources it needs to fight off infection. All he knows is what he was taught, what his teachers were taught, what has been passed down through generations of physicians who meant well, but understood so little. The bowl fills slowly. 1 cup, 2 cups, sometimes more. The amount varies based on your symptoms, your age, your perceived strength. Too little, and the treatment might not work. Too much, and, well, you might not wake up tomorrow. It's a delicate balance, they say. An art as much as a science. But here's the thing about medieval bloodletting. It wasn't some fringe practice performed by quacks and charlatans. This was mainstream medicine, endorsed by the most educated minds of the era, performed in the finest hospitals and the grandest courts. Kings were bled. Queens were bled. When you had a headache, you were bled. Fever, bled. Broken bone, believe it or not, bled. Pregnant, they'd probably bleed you for good measure. The theory was so pervasive, so deeply embedded in medical thinking, that it would persist for centuries. Even into the 1800s, doctors were still reaching for their lancets at the first sign of illness. George Washington, the first president of the United States, died in 1799 after his doctors drained nearly half his blood trying to cure a throat infection. Think about that. More than 400 years after our scene in 1347, and they were still making the same catastrophic mistake. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Right now you're still on that table, watching your blood drip into a bowl, feeling your strength drain away, and hoping desperately that your doctor knows what he's doing. He doesn't, but he believes he does, and somehow that makes it worse. Because there's no malice here, no evil intent, just catastrophic ignorance dressed up as expertise. Your doctor genuinely wants to help you. He's spent years studying. He's devoted his life to healing. He prays for his patients. He loses sleep worrying about them, and he's killing them with kindness. When the bowl is finally full enough, your doctor carefully removes it and applies a cloth to your arm, pressing down to stop the bleeding. He'll probably come back tomorrow to repeat the process, and the day after. And the day after that, monitoring your symptoms, adjusting the treatment, always certain that just a little more bloodletting will tip the balance in your favor. If you're lucky, your immune system will win its invisible war despite the treatment, not because of it. You'll wake up one morning feeling better, convinced that the bloodletting saved your life, never knowing that it nearly ended it. If you're unlucky, well, your family will be told that God has called you home, that your humors were too imbalanced to correct, that not every illness can be cured by mortal hands. Your doctor will move on to his next patient, carrying with him the absolute certainty that he did everything right. And somewhere in that gap, between good intentions and catastrophic outcomes, between ancient wisdom and modern understanding, lies the entire tragic history of medieval medicine. The sound of dripping blood meant you were healing or leaving. Often it was hard to tell which. Congratulations. You made it through Chapter 1. The real journey is just beginning. Let's talk about why they got it so spectacularly wrong. Because medieval doctors weren't stupid. They were working with the best information available to them. Information that happened to be based on observations, logical reasoning, and a complete misunderstanding of how the human body actually works. The theory of the four humors wasn't some random guess. It was a sophisticated medical framework that had been developed by some of the greatest minds of the ancient world. Hippocrates, the father of medicine himself, had proposed it around 400 BCE. Galen, a brilliant Roman physician, had expanded and refined it in the 2nd century CE. For nearly 2,000 years, this theory dominated Western medicine, and on the surface, it made perfect sense. The ancient physicians observed that the human body produced 4 main fluids. Blood, obviously. Phlegm, that mucus you cough up when you're sick. Yellow bile, the bitter substance you vomit when your stomach is empty. And black bile, a theoretical fluid they believed was produced by the spleen. though in reality what they were probably observing was partially digested blood from internal bleeding. These four fluids corresponded to four fundamental elements: air, water, fire, and earth. They also corresponded to four seasons, four stages of life, four temperaments. It was a beautiful, symmetrical system that explained everything from personality traits to disease states. Blood was hot and wet, associated with air and spring. If you had too much blood, you were sanguine, cheerful, optimistic, maybe a bit too passionate. But excess blood could also cause fever, inflammation, and congestion. Phlegm was cold and wet, linked to water and winter. Too much phlegm made you phlegmatic. Calm, unemotional, possibly lazy. It caused colds, respiratory problems, and general sluggishness. Yellow bile was hot and dry, connected to fire and summer. Excess yellow bile made you choleric, quick-tempered, ambitious, aggressive. It led to fever, digestive issues, and angry outbursts. Black bile was cold and dry, tied to earth and autumn. Too much black bile made you melancholic, thoughtful, artistic, prone to depression. It caused everything from constipation to what we'd now recognize as mental illness. The goal of medieval medicine was to keep these four humors in perfect balance. When they got out of whack, you got sick. The physician's job was to diagnose which humor was excessive or deficient, and then correct the imbalance through diet, lifestyle changes, and medical interventions. It was logical. It was comprehensive. It explained pretty much every symptom you could imagine, and it was completely, utterly, catastrophically wrong. But here's the thing, from a medieval perspective, it worked. Or at least, it seemed to work often enough to keep people believing in it. Think about it. If you bled a patient with a fever, sometimes they'd get better. Not because the bloodletting helped, but because their immune system eventually fought off whatever infection they had. But the doctor didn't know that. All he saw was, patient had fever. I bled them. Fever went away. Correlation equals causation. Case closed. This is called confirmation bias, and it's one of the most powerful cognitive traps humans can fall into. Medieval physicians saw what they expected to see. When treatments worked, it confirmed their theories. When treatments failed, well, clearly the patient was too far gone, or the imbalance was too severe, or God had other plans. The theory itself was never questioned. And why would it be? The four humors explained everything. Seasonal illnesses. Of course, people get more colds in winter. That's when phlegm naturally increases. Digestive problems in summer. Obviously too much yellow bile from all that heat. Depression in autumn. Black bile rising with the changing seasons. Personality differences. Simple. Some people are born with a natural tendency toward more blood, making them sanguine. Others have excess phlegm, making them calm and steady. Your very nature was determined by your humoral balance, which was why changing someone's personality or curing mental illness required physical interventions to rebalance their humors. Medieval doctors even extended the theory to explain how different foods affected health. Meat was hot and wet, increasing blood. Fish was cold and wet, increasing phlegm. Spices were hot and dry, increasing yellow bile. Vegetables were cold and dry, increasing black bile. If you had too much blood and were suffering from a fever, you'd be put on a diet of fish and vegetables to cool you down and dry you out. If you were too phlegmatic and sluggish, you'd be given meat and wine to heat you up and get your blood moving. It was an entire medical system, complete and self-contained. Every symptom had an explanation. Every illness had a treatment. There were no mysteries, no unknowns, just imbalances to be corrected. Except none of it was real. There is no yellow bile production system in your body. Black bile doesn't exist at all. It was probably a misunderstanding of old blood or diseased tissue. Phlegm isn't a humor that needs to be balanced. It's mucus produced by your respiratory system in response to irritation or infection. And blood, while obviously real and important, doesn't cause disease by being excessive. You can't have too much blood in the way they imagined. But try telling that to a medieval physician. You might as well tell them the earth revolves around the sun. Oh wait, that would get you in trouble too. The four humors theory was so deeply embedded in medieval thinking that it affected everything. Architecture was designed around humoral principles, with certain rooms considered better for different temperaments. Gardens were planted with herbs organized by their hot, cold, wet, or dry properties. Even warfare was influenced by it. Generals would choose battle strategies based on the humoral temperament of their soldiers. And medicine. Medicine was completely consumed by it. When you walked into that medieval clinic with your fever, your doctor wasn't just guessing at a treatment. He was applying a sophisticated diagnostic framework that had been refined over 2 millennia. He'd examine your pulse, your urine, your facial color, your tongue, your overall demeanor. He'd ask about your diet, your sleep, your emotions. He'd consider the season, the weather, your age, your occupation. All of this data would be processed through the lens of humoral theory. And once he'd determined which humor was out of balance, the treatment path was clear. Too much blood, bloodletting, too much phlegm, expectorants to help you cough it up, or purgatives to help you, well, expel it from the other end. Too much yellow bile, laxatives and bland diets, too much black bile, medications to help you vomit it up. Notice a pattern. Medieval medicine was really interested in getting things out of your body. Blood, phlegm, bile, whatever. If you had too much of something, they wanted to help you get rid of it. Violently, if necessary. This led to some truly horrific treatments. Patients were bled until they fainted. They were given such powerful laxatives that they became dangerously dehydrated. They were forced to vomit repeatedly until their throat bled. They were purged and drained and evacuated in every way imaginable. And through it all, the physicians maintained absolute confidence in their methods. Because the theory said it should work, the ancient texts confirmed it, and confirmation bias did the rest. Here's perhaps the saddest part. Some of these treatments actually did provide temporary relief, just not for the reasons doctors thought. Bloodletting could sometimes lower blood pressure, which might reduce the symptoms of certain conditions like severe headaches. Purgatives could relieve constipation. Expectorants could help clear congestion. But the relief was symptomatic and temporary. The underlying conditions weren't being treated. And more often than not, the treatments themselves created new problems that were worse than the original illness. Imagine being treated for a simple cold. You're congested, coughing up phlegm, feeling miserable but not in serious danger. Your medieval doctor diagnoses excess phlegm and puts you on a treatment plan. First, he gives you a strong expectorant to help you cough harder. Then he prescribes a diet of hot, dry foods to counteract the cold, wet phlegm. If that doesn't work quickly enough, he might bleed you to remove the phlegm he believes is mixing with your blood. He might give you an emetic to make you vomit up the phlegm from your stomach. In 2025, you'd take some decongestant, rest, and be fine in a week. In 1347, you're being bled, purged, and force-fed spicy food while your body is trying desperately to fight off a rhinovirus. Is it any wonder that so many people died from what we'd consider minor illnesses? But the theory persisted. It had to, because without it, medieval physicians had nothing. No germ theory, no understanding of anatomy and physiology, no concept of infection or immunity, or any of the fundamental principles that make modern medicine work. The four humors gave them a framework, however flawed. It gave them the confidence to act, to treat, to heal, or at least to try. And sometimes, despite everything, patients did get better. The human body is remarkably resilient. It can survive incredible abuse and still heal itself. Medieval people recovered from illnesses in spite of their treatments, not because of them. But as long as some patients survived, the theory lived on. It would take centuries, countless unnecessary deaths, and a complete revolution in scientific thinking to finally dislodge the four humors from medical practice. And even then, echoes of it persist. We still talk about someone being in a bad humor or having a phlegmatic personality. The language of medieval medicine has outlived the medicine itself. But on that table in 1347, watching your blood drip into a bowl, you don't know any of this. You don't know that one day humans will understand viruses and bacteria and antibiotics. You don't know that the theory guiding your treatment is fundamentally flawed. All you know is that your doctor seems confident, your family is praying, and you're getting weaker by the minute. The ancient wisdom that was supposed to save you is slowly killing you instead. And the real tragedy, everyone involved truly believed they were doing the right thing. Let's say the bloodletting didn't work. Let's say you're still feverish, still weak, still obviously sick, despite having lost a disturbing amount of blood. Does your medieval doctor admit defeat? Does he question his methods? Absolutely not. He just tries harder. Enter the leeches. Yes, actual living worms that attach themselves to your skin and drink your blood while you lie there wondering if this is medicine or some kind of medieval horror show. Spoiler alert, it's somehow both. Leeches had been used in medicine since ancient times. Galen loved them. Avicenna loved them. Every reputable physician in the medieval world kept a jar of leeches handy, carefully maintained and well fed. These weren't just any worms, they were medical instruments, living tools that could extract blood with a precision that no blade could match. Or so the theory went. The logic, if you can call it that, was actually quite sophisticated within the framework of humoral medicine. When you cut someone to let blood, you're drawing from a large vein or artery. The blood flows quickly, and it's hard to control exactly how much you're taking. It's a crude method, effective but imprecise. Leeches, on the other hand, are natural experts at blood extraction. They've evolved over millions of years to do exactly this. They have 3 jaws, each lined with tiny teeth, that create a Y-shaped wound. They secrete a substance called hirudin, which prevents blood from clotting, allowing them to feed slowly and steadily. They know exactly how much to take before they're full and drop off on their own. To a medieval physician, this made them perfect for delicate work. Need to draw blood from near the eyes? Leeches. From the temples? Leeches. From sensitive areas where a blade might cause too much damage? You guessed it. Leeches. Your doctor opens his leech jar with practiced care. Inside, dozens of dark, writhing shapes move through murky water. He selects several healthy specimens, each about 2 to 3 inches long, their segmented bodies rippling as they sense fresh blood nearby. He places the first one on your neck, just below your jaw. You feel it immediately, a cold, wet sensation, followed by a strange pulling. The leech has attached itself. Its teeth are breaking through your skin right now, microscopic saws working their way into your flesh. In a few seconds, it'll hit a blood vessel, and the feeding will begin. Then another leech, and another. Your doctor is strategic about placement, positioning them where he believes the bad humors are concentrated. Near the head for headaches, on the abdomen for digestive issues, over the liver for problems with yellow bile. You can feel them working. Each one creates a steady, rhythmic pulling sensation as it feeds. It's not painful exactly. The leech's saliva contains a mild anesthetic along with the anticoagulant, but it's deeply, profoundly disturbing. You can feel your blood leaving your body, drop by drop, feeding these parasites that your doctor has deliberately placed on you. Medieval physicians loved leeches for several reasons beyond their precision. They never argued back, never complained, never questioned the treatment plan. They were reusable, just drop them back in the jar after they fed, and they'd be ready to go again after they'd digested their meal. And perhaps most importantly, they seemed scientific, sophisticated, a cut above the crude practice of just slashing someone's arm and catching blood in a bowl. There was even a hierarchy among leeches. Medical leeches, Hirudo medicinalis, were considered the gold standard. They were bred specifically for medical use, carefully managed to ensure they were disease-free and hungry. Some physicians swore by Hungarian leeches, others preferred French leeches. There were debates, serious scholarly debates, about which leeches produced the best therapeutic results. It would almost be funny if it wasn't so tragic, because here's what your medieval doctor didn't know. Leeches can carry diseases. The same leeches that had fed on a patient with a bacterial infection could transmit that infection to you. They were not sterile medical instruments. They were living creatures that spent most of their time in stagnant water, swimming in whatever bacteria and parasites called that jar home. But even without that risk, the fundamental problem remained. You don't need blood removed. Your body needs every drop it can keep, especially when it's fighting an infection. Those red blood cells carry oxygen to your tissues. Those white blood cells are your immune system's soldiers. That plasma carries nutrients and antibodies, and all the resources your body needs to heal itself, and they're feeding it to worms. Each leech can consume about 5 to 15 milliliters of blood before it's full. Your doctor has placed 6 leeches on you. That's potentially 90 milliliters of blood, roughly 6 tablespoons. Doesn't sound like much, does it? Except you were already bled yesterday, and the day before, and you'll be bled again tomorrow. And you're probably not eating well because you feel terrible, and your body is already under stress from whatever illness brought you here in the first place. Drop by drop, treatment by treatment, your doctor is draining away your strength. But he doesn't see it that way. When the leeches finally drop off bloated and satisfied, he examines you carefully. Your pulse is weaker? Good. That means the excess blood is gone. Your skin is paler. Excellent. The feverish flush is fading. You're feeling dizzy. Perfect. That's just the bad humors leaving your system. Every sign of deterioration is interpreted as progress. This is the dark art of medieval medicine. Well-meaning ignorance, confirmation bias, and the human body's unfortunate ability to send ambiguous signals that can be interpreted in wildly different ways, depending on what you're looking for. And leeches weren't just used for bloodletting. Oh no. Medieval physicians had discovered all sorts of creative applications. Leeches could be placed inside the mouth to treat dental problems. They could be applied to hemorrhoids. They could even be inserted into, let's say, more intimate areas to treat various gynecological conditions. Imagine being a woman in medieval times, going to a physician with menstrual cramps and having him suggest putting leeches on your genitals. And the worst part, this wasn't some quack remedy. This was standard medical practice, recommended in the most respected medical texts of the era. The leech trade was serious business. Leech collectors would wade into marshes and ponds, letting the leeches attach to their own legs, then harvesting them for sale to physicians and apothecaries. It was a legitimate profession, mentioned in tax records and guild regulations. Some regions became famous for their superior leeches. There were leech farms, leech breeding programs, and international leech trade networks. All of this infrastructure, all of this economic activity, built around a medical practice that was fundamentally harmful. But it gets worse. Sometimes leeches didn't want to attach where the doctor wanted them to. They'd crawl away, or they'd latch onto the wrong spot, or they'd just refuse to feed. When that happened, physicians had techniques to encourage them. They might scrape the skin to make it bleed a little, giving the leeches a taste. They might cover the area with milk or blood to attract them. They might even starve the leeches for a few days beforehand to make them more aggressive. And sometimes, leeches would get lost. They'd crawl into body cavities, ears, noses, throats. There are medical records of leeches that had to be removed from people's airways after they crawled down during treatment. Leeches that attached to the inside of the throat and had to be carefully extracted before they caused the patient to choke. Leeches that disappeared into vaginal or rectal canals and had to be, let's just say, retrieved. Medieval medicine was not for the squeamish. Yet through all of this, the practice continued, because occasionally someone would get better. Their fever would break. Their pain would ease, and the physician would record another successful treatment. Another data point, confirming the effectiveness of medicinal leeches. The fact that most patients who recovered did so despite the leeches, not because of them, was impossible to see from within the medieval paradigm. They had no control groups, no double-blind studies, no statistical analysis, just observations interpreted through the lens of a theory that explained everything, and therefore couldn't be disproven. Imagine being that patient on the table, 6 leeches attached to your neck and shoulders, each one slowly filling with your blood. Your doctor is nodding approvingly, making notes about your treatment, already planning tomorrow's session. Your family is in the corner praying for your recovery, grateful that such sophisticated medicine is available. And you're getting weaker. You can feel it, the exhaustion creeping through your limbs, the lightheadedness. The sense that something is deeply, fundamentally wrong with this treatment, but you can't say anything, because your doctor is the expert. He's studied for years. He has prestigious credentials. He's citing Galen and Hippocrates and Avicenna. Who are you to question 2,000 years of medical wisdom? So you lie there, and you bleed, and you hope that your body can survive both the illness and the cure. Medieval physicians kept careful records of their leech treatments. They documented where leeches were placed, how long they fed, what symptoms improved. They wrote treatises on the art of leech application. They trained apprentices in the proper technique. They were convinced they were advancing medical science. And in a way they were certainly learning a lot about leeches, just not about healing. The irony is that modern medicine has actually found legitimate uses for medical leeches. They're used in microsurgery to reduce venous congestion. They're employed in reattaching severed fingers and ears, where their anticoagulant properties can be genuinely helpful. There are FDA-approved medical leeches available today, but they're used in very specific, carefully controlled situations by doctors who actually understand the underlying physiology. not as a general cure-all for imbalanced humors. Your medieval doctor doesn't know any of this, of course. He doesn't know that in 800 years, leeches will still be used in medicine, but in ways that would seem impossibly advanced to him. He doesn't know about microsurgery or venous congestion or any of the actual mechanisms that make leech therapy occasionally useful. All he knows is that the texts say leeches balance the humors, and the humors need balancing, and therefore leeches are medicine. Doctors loved leeches. They never argued back. They always did exactly what they were supposed to do. And if the patient died anyway, well, clearly the imbalance was too severe. The leeches tried their best. It was never the treatment's fault. It was never the theory's fault. It was just fate, just God's will, just the way things were. And tomorrow another patient would arrive with another fever, and out would come the leech jar once again. But what happens when the bloodletting fails? When the leeches don't work? When your fever rages on despite every medical intervention your doctor can throw at it? That's when things get spiritual. Medieval people didn't see a hard line between physical illness and spiritual corruption. To them, they were often the same thing. Sickness was God's judgment, a punishment for sin, a test of faith, or in some cases, the work of demons and evil spirits actively tormenting your body. So when medicine failed, it was time to call in reinforcements. Not more doctors. Priests. Your medieval physician, after days of bloodletting and leech therapy with no improvement, finally admits that this case requires divine intervention. He's not giving up, mind you. He's just expanding the treatment team. Because why choose between medicine and prayer when you can have both working against your illness? The local priest arrives, bringing with him all the tools of spiritual warfare. Holy water, blessed relics, prayer books, crucifixes, and an absolute unshakable conviction that faith can move mountains, cast out demons, and yes, cure diseases. He begins with prayers, long, elaborate prayers in Latin that you don't understand, but that sound impressively official. He's asking God to have mercy on your soul, to forgive whatever sins might have brought this illness upon you, to cast out any evil spirits that might have taken residence in your fevered body. Then comes the holy water. He sprinkles it on you, makes the sign of the cross on your forehead, your chest, your hands. The water is cold. It might have come from a blessed well, or it might have been blessed by a bishop, or it might have just been blessed by this local priest using the authority of his office. Either way, it's supposed to have power against the forces of darkness. If you're lucky, that's as intense as it gets. A few prayers, some holy water, maybe a relic of a local saint placed on your chest while everyone kneels and prays for your recovery. It's comforting, in a way. Your family is there, united in faith, calling on forces greater than any earthly physician. But if you're unlucky, if your condition is particularly severe or unusual, if you're showing symptoms that seem supernatural, things can escalate quickly. Exorcism. The medieval church took demonic possession very seriously, and the symptoms they associated with possession were broad enough to encompass all sorts of medical conditions we'd now recognize as epilepsy, psychosis, Tourette's syndrome, brain tumors, and various other neurological disorders. Speaking in strange voices. Possession, violent convulsions, possession, sudden personality changes, possession, claiming to see or hear things others can't. Definitely possession. The priest begins the exorcism ritual, commanding the demon in the name of God, Jesus Christ, and all the saints to leave your body. His voice grows louder, more forceful. He's not asking anymore. He's demanding, ordering. This is spiritual combat, and he's bringing the full authority of the church to bear. He might use blessed salt, forcing you to consume it, because demons supposedly can't stand salt. He might make you drink holy water, lots of it, until you're practically drowning. He might read from Scripture, long passages from the Gospel denouncing Satan and his works. And if that doesn't work, if you're still sick, still feverish, still suffering, well, there are more aggressive techniques. Some priests believed that demons could be driven out through discomfort. If you make the body uncomfortable enough, the thinking went, the demon will abandon it. So they might bind you in chains, deprive you of food and water, subject you to loud noises, bright lights, anything to make the possessed body inhospitable to evil spirits. Or they might try the opposite approach, gentleness, kindness, surrounding you with prayer and song, creating an environment so holy that no demon could possibly remain. Monks would chant for hours. Your family would keep vigil, praying in shifts through the night. Candles would burn continuously. The air would fill with incense. And sometimes, miraculously, you'd get better. Not because demons were cast out, but because your immune system finally won its invisible war against whatever bacterial or viral infection had invaded your body, or because the fever broke on its own, as fevers do, or because your body, despite everything it had been put through, managed to heal itself, but nobody saw it that way. To everyone present, it was a miracle, proof that faith works, proof that demons are real and can be defeated, proof that the spiritual and physical worlds are intimately connected. The priest would thank God, your family would weep with relief, and the story would spread through the village, another testament to the power of prayer, another reason to believe that illness is fundamentally a spiritual problem, requiring spiritual solutions. But what about when prayer didn't work? When the exorcism failed? When you died despite all the holy water and blessed relics and desperate prayers? That was explained away too. Your sins were too great, the demon too powerful, God's plan too mysterious to understand. It was never a failure of the method. It was always something else, something beyond mortal comprehension. This is how faith-based medicine perpetuated itself. Every success was proof it worked. Every failure was proof that God works in mysterious ways. Medieval physicians often worked hand in hand with priests. They didn't see any contradiction between bleeding a patient and blessing them, between applying leeches and applying holy water. Physical and spiritual healing were different aspects of the same process, both necessary, both valid. In fact, many physicians were themselves members of religious orders. Monasteries were centers of medical learning. Monks and nuns ran hospitals. The church was deeply involved in healthcare, not as some separate institution, but as an integral part of it. This created an interesting dynamic. When medicine failed, it was easy to shift to prayer. When prayer failed, you could always try more medicine. You could keep cycling between physical and spiritual interventions indefinitely, always convinced that the next treatment would be the one that worked. And sometimes this actually helped people, not physically, but psychologically. The placebo effect is real. Feeling cared for, feeling like something is being done, having hope, these things can genuinely impact recovery. Patients who believed they were being healed by prayer sometimes did feel better, even if the underlying mechanism was purely psychological. But there was a dark side to this fusion of faith and medicine. When treatments failed, patients could be blamed for their own deaths. Didn't have enough faith, didn't pray hard enough. Had some hidden sin that blocked God's healing grace. It added guilt and shame to physical suffering, and it delayed the development of real medicine. As long as illness could be explained as punishment for sin, as long as prayer was considered a valid treatment, there was less incentive to study anatomy, to experiment with new treatments, to question the ancient theories. Why cut open bodies to understand how they work when you already know the answer? Imbalanced humors, divine punishment, demonic possession. The explanations were complete. The treatments were established. Any further investigation seemed unnecessary, even sacrilegious. There were exceptions, of course. Some medieval physicians did conduct careful observations, did experiment, did question. But they were working against centuries of established doctrine, both medical and religious. Progress was slow, painful, and often dangerous for those who pushed too hard against accepted wisdom. Meanwhile, you're still on that table, or maybe on your sickbed at home now, surrounded by priests and family members, all praying fervently for your recovery. Candles flicker. Incense smoke curls through the air. Latin prayers echo off the walls. Your doctor has done everything he can. The leeches have fed. Your blood has been let. Your humors have been balanced as well as mortal skill allows. Now it's in God's hands. If bloodletting didn't help, they'd try prayer or fire. Yes, fire. Because when spiritual remedies alone weren't enough, medieval medicine had another tool in its arsenal. One that combined the physical and the spiritual in the most brutal way possible. Cauterization. The theory was simple. Fire purifies. Fire drives out evil. Fire can burn away diseased tissue and seal wounds. And if applied correctly, with prayer and proper intention, fire could cure almost anything. A red-hot iron rod, heated in the coals until it glows, then pressed against your skin, against your infected wound, against your swollen lymph nodes. against whatever part of you seems to be the source of the sickness. The smell is something you'll never forget. Burning flesh has a distinct, sweet, nauseating odor that fills the room and clings to everything. Your own flesh, cooking like meat over a fire. The sound is worse, a hiss and sizzle as moisture evaporates instantly. Sometimes a scream if the patient hasn't passed out from the pain. The priest is still there, still praying, blessing the iron before it touches your skin. This isn't just medical treatment, it's holy work. The fire is purifying your body and your soul simultaneously. The pain you're experiencing is redemptive, cleansing, necessary. Medieval people believed in the spiritual value of suffering. Pain was seen as a way to share in Christ's suffering, to purify the soul, to earn salvation. So when treatment hurt, and it always hurt, that wasn't a flaw. It was a feature. The more you suffered, the more effective the treatment must be. If it was easy and painless, how could it possibly drive out something as powerful as disease or demons? This mindset led to treatments that seem deliberately cruel by modern standards. But in the medieval worldview, they made perfect sense. You weren't torturing the patient, you were saving them, body and soul. And sometimes, against all odds, patients survived these treatments. Their bodies healed despite the trauma. Their immune systems fought off infection despite being weakened by blood loss and shock and burn wounds. And every single survival was recorded as a success. More evidence that the methods worked. More reason to continue using them. They believed faith could fix the flesh. And sometimes that belief kept them alive, not because faith actually cured disease, but because the human body is remarkably, almost unbelievably resilient. It can survive incredible damage and still heal. It can fight off infections while simultaneously recovering from therapeutic injuries. It can endure treatments that should kill it and somehow make it to the other side. Medieval medicine survived not because it was effective, but because human bodies are tough enough to survive it, most of the time. Now let's talk about the person you really, truly did not want to see in medieval times. Not the physician with his leeches and theories. Not the priest with his prayers and holy water. No, the person who inspired the most dread was the barber-surgeon. Yes, barber, as in the same person who cuts your hair. In medieval society, there was a clear hierarchy in medicine. At the top were the physicians, the educated elite who'd studied at universities, read the ancient texts and understood humoral theory. They were respected, well paid, and generally didn't get their hands dirty with actual surgery. Below them were the surgeons. And in many places, surgeons weren't considered real doctors at all. They were craftsmen, manual laborers, people who worked with their hands rather than their minds. And at the bottom of this hierarchy, doing the actual cutting and stitching and amputating, were the barber-surgeons. The barber-surgeon guild made perfect sense in its own twisted way. Both professions required sharp blades and a steady hand. Both involved cutting flesh, whether it was shaving a face or opening a vein for bloodletting. Both required a certain comfort level with blood and bodily fluids. So why not combine them? Why not have the same person who trims your beard also remove your appendix? What could possibly go wrong? Everything could go wrong. Your barber-surgeon arrives at your home, or you're brought to his shop, which doubles as a surgery theatre. The same chair where customers sit for a shave is where you'll sit for your amputation. The same basin used for catching hair clippings will catch your blood. The same razor that trimmed beards this morning will cut into your flesh this afternoon. He's wearing his regular clothes, stained with the residue of his dual professions. Hair clippings, blood, pus, shaving soap, all mixed together in a permanent patina on his leather apron. His tools are laid out on a table. Saws with teeth that look like they were designed for carpentry because they were. Knives of various sizes, some curved, some straight, all of them sharp, but none of them sterilized. Hooks and clamps and needles and thread. A cauterizing iron already heating in the coals. There's no anesthesia. Let me say that again for emphasis. There is no anesthesia. No gas to put you to sleep. No injection to numb the area. No pills to dull the pain. The best you can hope for is a strong drink beforehand and a leather strap to bite down on during the procedure. Some barber surgeons would offer their patients a wooden stick wrapped in leather. Others preferred a piece of rope or cloth. The point was to give you something to bite down on so you wouldn't break your teeth or bite through your tongue when the pain became unbearable, because it would become unbearable. Count on it. Let's say you've broken your leg. Badly. The bone is protruding through the skin, a compound fracture that in 2025 would require surgery, pins, possibly a metal plate, followed by months of physical therapy. You'd be given powerful painkillers and antibiotics, and you'd probably make a full recovery. In 1347, you have two options. The barber surgeon can try to set the bone, pushing it back through the skin and splinting the leg, hoping it heals correctly and doesn't get infected. This option has maybe a 30% success rate, and even if it works, you'll likely walk with a limp for the rest of your life. Or he can amputate. Clean cut, above the break, cauterize the stump, and you'll be fitted with a wooden peg later. This option has maybe a 50% survival rate, and if you survive, you'll be disabled for life. But at least you won't die slowly from gangrene spreading up from your shattered leg. Most barber surgeons recommended amputation. It was quicker, cleaner, and had better outcomes than trying to save a badly damaged limb. Plus, frankly, it was easier. Cutting off a leg is straightforward. Trying to set bones and save tissue and prevent infection, that's complicated. So amputation it is. 3 strong men hold you down, one on each arm, one controlling your good leg and trying to immobilize the injured one. You're given something to bite on, maybe a slug of strong alcohol, though that won't help much. And then the barber surgeon gets to work. The tourniquet goes on first, tied tightly above the amputation site to minimize blood loss. Then comes the knife, cutting through skin and muscle in a circular pattern. The barber surgeon works quickly, methodically, peeling back the flesh to expose the bone beneath. You're screaming now. Can't help it. The pain is beyond description. It's not like anything you've ever experienced. It's primal, overwhelming, all-consuming. Your vision goes white. You might pass out. Many patients do at this point, and that's a mercy. But if you stay conscious, you'll hear the saw, that distinctive grinding sound as metal teeth bite into bone. Feel the vibration traveling through your body. Know with absolute certainty that part of you is being removed, cut away, severed. The bone resists. It always resists. Bone is strong, designed by nature to support your weight and protect your organs. It doesn't give up easily. The barber surgeon has to saw back and forth, applying steady pressure, working the blade through the dense tissue. The men holding you down have to grip tighter because your body is fighting this. Every instinct you have is screaming that this is wrong, that you're being killed, that you need to escape, but you can't. You're held fast, and the sawing continues. Finally, the bone gives way. The barber surgeon cuts through the last bit of muscle and skin, and your leg comes off. Completely, irrevocably. Part of you is now in a bucket on the floor and you'll never get it back. But the surgery isn't over. Now comes the cauterization. The iron has been heating this whole time, glowing red hot in the coals. The barber surgeon takes it, approaches your stump, and without hesitation presses the searing metal against your raw flesh. The smell, God, the smell. Your own flesh burning, cooking, sealing. The sound of it sizzling. The pain, somehow even worse than the amputation itself. A different kind of agony, sharp and bright and all-consuming. He's sealing the blood vessels, stopping the bleeding, creating a cauterized surface that will hopefully heal without infection. It's brutal, but it's effective. More effective than trying to stitch or bandage a wound that large. When it's finally over, when the iron is pulled away and the barber surgeon steps back to examine his work, you're in shock. Your body has shut down non-essential functions to cope with the trauma. You might be shaking. You might be crying. You might have vomited or lost control of your bladder. The strong men release you carefully, and you're laid down on a cot or table. Your stump is wrapped in bandages that were probably not clean. You're given water, maybe some herbal concoction that's supposed to prevent infection but won't. And now comes the waiting. The next few days will determine whether you survive this. If you're lucky, very lucky, the stump will begin to heal. The cauterized tissue will form a scab. The inflammation will gradually decrease. You won't develop a fever, and in a few weeks, you'll start the long process of learning to live without your leg. If you're unlucky, and most patients were unlucky, infection will set in. The wound will become red, swollen, hot to the touch. Pus will seep from beneath the bandages. You'll develop a fever that keeps climbing despite all treatment. The infection will spread, traveling up your remaining leg, poisoning your blood, and you'll die probably within a week in agony, wondering why you survived the surgery only to die from its aftermath. Medieval barber surgeons were aware of infection. though they didn't understand it. They called it putrefaction and believed it was caused by bad air or imbalanced humors. They tried to prevent it with all sorts of remedies, packing wounds with honey or wine, applying poultices made from bread mold, which ironically sometimes contained natural penicillin, praying over the patient. None of it was particularly effective because they didn't understand that infection was caused by bacteria. They didn't know about germs. They had no concept of sterilization or antiseptic technique. Their tools were clean only by medieval standards, which is to say, not clean at all. The same saw that cut through your leg today cut through someone else's arm yesterday. It was wiped off, sure, maybe rinsed in water, but sterilized never. The concept didn't exist. Your barber surgeon also cuts hair, shaves beards, and occasionally removes limbs. This wasn't a joke or an insult. It was reality. The barber pole, that red and white striped symbol you still see outside barbershops today, those colors represent blood and bandages. The pole itself represents the staff patients would grip during bloodletting to make their veins stand out. Barbershops advertised both services. Come in for a shave and a haircut. Stay for the amputation. The same proprietor who made you look presentable for church on Sunday could remove your gangrenous toe on Monday. Some barber surgeons were quite skilled. They had to be. They performed operations that would make modern surgeons pale, removing bladder stones through the perineum, treating cataracts by pushing the clouded lens back into the eye, performing cesarean sections, though usually only on dead mothers to try to save the child, trepanation, drilling holes in skulls to treat head injuries or mental illness. All of this without anesthesia, without proper tools, without understanding of anatomy or infection, or any of the principles that make modern surgery possible. They learned by doing, by apprenticeship, by trial and error, though mostly error. A successful barber surgeon was one who lost fewer patients than his competitors. Not one who saved most of his patients, just one who killed slightly fewer. At least he washed his hands, in the same bucket used for knives. This was actually considered good practice. Some barber surgeons would rinse their hands between patients, in water that had been sitting there all day. That had been used to rinse tools that might have bits of tissue floating in it. It was better than nothing. Barely. The barber surgeon's shop was a place of horror that people entered voluntarily because the alternative was worse. Better to risk death on the operating table than certain death from infection or gangrene or a tumor that just kept growing. At least the surgery was quick. That was perhaps the only mercy. Barber surgeons prided themselves on speed. A leg could be amputated in under 2 minutes if you were fast. A bladder stone removed in 5 minutes. The faster you worked, the less time the patient spent in agony, the less time for them to die from shock. Speed was the only anesthetic they had. And when it was over, when you'd survived the immediate trauma of surgery, you'd be sent home with instructions to keep the wound clean, impossible, to change the bandages regularly with what, and to pray for recovery, the only part that was actually free. If you survived, you'd have a scar and a story. If you died, well, at least you'd tried. At least you'd done something rather than just waiting for the disease to kill you. That was the bargain medieval people made with their barber surgeons. We know this might kill you. It probably will kill you. But doing nothing will definitely kill you. So let's give it a try. The smell of iron, hot wood, and sweat lingers long after he's gone. Long after the barber surgeon has packed up his tools and moved on to his next appointment, the evidence of his work remains. The blood-stained bandages, the smell of cauterized flesh, the empty space where your leg used to be, and the knowledge that you've crossed a threshold. You're no longer whole. You're no longer the person you were yesterday. You're a survivor of medieval medicine, which is to say you survived despite it, not because of it. Welcome to the other side. You made it through Chapter 5. The real nightmare is just beginning. Let's talk about what happened when the problem wasn't your body. What happened when your mind broke instead? Because mental illness existed in the Middle Ages, of course it did. Depression, anxiety, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, PTSD, all the conditions we recognize today were just as present in medieval brains as they are in modern ones. Human neurology hasn't changed much in the last 1,000 years, but the medieval understanding of mental illness, that was catastrophically different. You wake up one morning and you can't get out of bed, not because you're physically sick, but because a crushing weight has settled over your chest, making even the simplest tasks feel impossible. Your thoughts spiral into darkness. Nothing brings you joy. Food tastes like ash. Sleep brings no rest. In 2025, a doctor might diagnose you with clinical depression. You'd get therapy, maybe medication, social support. People would understand that you're experiencing a medical condition that affects brain chemistry. In 1347, you're suffering from an excess of black bile. Melancholia, they call it, and it's both a physical and spiritual problem. The treatment? First, they'll try to balance your humors. You'll be given foods that are hot and wet to counteract the cold, dry nature of black bile. Wine, meat, rich warming spices. You'll be encouraged to seek warmth and light, to avoid solitude and darkness. If that doesn't work, they'll move to more aggressive interventions. Bloodletting to remove the corrupted black bile, purgatives to help you expel it, emetics to make you vomit it up, and if that still doesn't work, they'll start to suspect something darker, demonic influence. Because in the medieval worldview, there was often a thin line between medical illness and spiritual corruption. If your melancholia was severe enough, if you started hearing voices or seeing things that weren't there, if you talked about wanting to die, that wasn't just humoral imbalance anymore. That was the devil, or worse, demons had taken up residence in your body, whispering evil thoughts, driving you toward despair and potentially toward the ultimate sin of suicide. Now you're not just seeing a physician, you're seeing a priest. And the treatment plan has expanded from balancing humors to saving your immortal soul. But let's talk about a different scenario. Let's say you have epilepsy. You're going about your day, maybe working in a field or cooking a meal, when suddenly your vision goes strange. You smell something that isn't there, a weird metallic scent. You feel detached, distant, like you're watching yourself from outside your body. Then the seizure hits. You drop to the ground, convulsing. Your muscles lock and release in rapid succession. Your eyes roll back. Foam appears at your mouth. You might bite your tongue, tasting blood. You have no control, no awareness, no ability to stop what's happening. To observers in 2025, this is clearly a medical emergency. Someone calls an ambulance. A neurologist will eventually diagnose epilepsy, a condition caused by abnormal electrical activity in the brain. You'll get anticonvulsant medication. You'll learn to recognize your triggers and warning signs. To observers in 1347, you're possessed. Think about it from their perspective. One moment you're normal. The next, some force has taken control of your body, making you thrash and foam and lose all human dignity. Your eyes look wrong. Your movements are violent and inhuman. And then, just as suddenly, it stops, and you're back, confused and exhausted, but with no memory of what just happened. What else could it be but supernatural? The falling sickness, they called it, morbus comitialis. And while some physicians recognized it as a natural disease, many people believed it was demonic in origin. After all, the person looked like they were fighting against something invisible, like they were being attacked by forces no one else could see. Treatment varied wildly depending on who you consulted and how severe your case was. Some physicians would try traditional humoral medicine. Epilepsy was thought to be caused by excessive phlegm in the brain, so you'd be given hot, dry foods and medicines to dry out your system. You might be bled, you might be given purgatives, but others would go straight to spiritual intervention. Prayers, relics of saints known to help epileptics, holy water sprinkled on you during seizures, pilgrimages to sacred sites. And if you were really unlucky, if your seizures were particularly violent or frequent, someone might suggest trepanation, drilling a hole in your skull. The theory was that pressure was building up in your head, possibly from accumulated humors or from evil spirits literally pressing against the inside of your skull. By drilling a hole, you'd release that pressure. You'd give the demons a way out. This wasn't some fringe quack treatment. Trepanation was serious medicine, performed by trained surgeons, recommended in medical texts, and we have archaeological evidence that people survived it. We found medieval skulls with holes that show signs of healing, meaning the person lived for years after having their skull opened. Did it help with seizures? No. Of course not. Epilepsy isn't caused by pressure in the skull or by demons, but some people did report feeling better afterward, probably because the placebo effect is powerful and because the human body can survive incredible trauma. Let's talk about another condition, psychosis. You start hearing voices. Not metaphorical inner dialogue, but actual voices that seem to come from outside your head. They comment on your actions. They tell you things. Maybe they're critical and harsh. Maybe they're commanding, telling you to do things. You start seeing things too. Shadows that move wrong, figures that vanish when you look directly at them, patterns and connections that no one else can see, but that seem absolutely real and urgent to you. In 2025, a psychiatrist would recognize this as a psychotic episode, possibly schizophrenia, possibly a severe mood disorder with psychotic features. You'd get antipsychotic medication, therapy, support systems, an understanding that your brain is experiencing a malfunction in how it processes reality. In 1347, you're either a prophet or possessed, and the distinction between those two could be terrifyingly thin. If your visions align with church doctrine, if your voices tell you things that support the established order, if your experiences can be interpreted as divine revelation, you might be venerated, sought after, considered touched by God. But if your voices tell you things that contradict church teaching, if your visions are dark or sexual or violent, if you claim to see demons or hell or things that challenge authority, you're in serious danger, because now you're not just sick. You're a spiritual threat. The treatment for demonic possession could be gentle or brutal depending on the priest and the severity of your symptoms. Some exorcisms were conducted with kindness, surrounding you with prayer and holy objects, singing hymns, calling on God's mercy. Others were violent. You'd be restrained, sometimes for days, deprived of food and water because demons supposedly can't stand fasting, subjected to loud noises, bright lights, anything to make the possessed body uncomfortable. The logic being that if you made the vessel inhospitable enough, the demon would leave. Sometimes people died during exorcisms, from dehydration, from exhaustion, from the stress of being restrained and terrified for days on end, but their deaths would be recorded as martyrdom, as final proof that the demon was real and powerful, as tragic but ultimately spiritual victories, because at least the soul was saved even if the body was lost. They thought demons caused madness, but grief was the real ghost. Because here's what medieval people didn't understand about mental illness. It's often a response to trauma, to loss, to circumstances that would break anyone given enough time and pressure. Medieval life was brutal. You watched your children die, often before they reached their 5th birthday. You lost friends and family to plague, famine, war. You lived with constant uncertainty, never knowing if this harvest would fail, if raiders would come, if disease would sweep through your village. You had no control over your life, no agency, no safety net. You worked from dawn to dusk doing backbreaking labor, and one bad season could mean starvation. Of course, people broke under that pressure. Of course, minds fractured. Of course, people developed what we'd now recognize as PTSD, depression, anxiety disorders. But medieval medicine had no framework for understanding trauma, no concept of psychological stress, no recognition that the mind could be injured by experience the same way the body could be injured by a blade. So when people showed symptoms of mental illness, those symptoms had to be explained through the only frameworks available: humoral imbalance or spiritual corruption. And the treatments reflected that limited understanding. A woman experiencing postpartum psychosis after losing multiple children in infancy wouldn't be recognized as traumatized. She'd be diagnosed with hysteria, a wandering womb, or demonic influence. She might be given foul-smelling substances to drive the womb back into place. She might be exorcised. She might be locked away for her own safety and the safety of others. A soldier returning from war, experiencing what we'd call PTSD, reliving battles in his nightmares, jumping at sudden sounds, unable to readjust to civilian life, he'd be considered weak, cowardly, possibly corrupted by the violence he'd participated in. He certainly wouldn't get therapy or recognition that warfare causes psychological damage. The medieval understanding of mental illness was simultaneously more compassionate and more brutal than we might imagine. More compassionate because mental illness was seen as something that happened to you, not something you chose. You didn't choose to have an excess of black bile. You didn't invite demons to possess you. You were a victim, not a perpetrator. But more brutal because the treatments were horrific, and because the stigma was enormous. Being labeled as demon-possessed could destroy your life, even if you eventually recovered. Your neighbors would always remember, always suspect, always wonder if the demons might return. Some people with mental illness found refuge in monasteries or convents. Religious communities sometimes provided a kind of asylum, a place where odd behavior might be tolerated as holy eccentricity rather than punished as demonic influence. But others were simply cast out, left to wander as beggars, exploited, abused. Medieval society had little room for people who couldn't contribute economically, and mental illness often made work impossible. The irony is that some medieval treatments for mental illness actually helped, but not for the reasons anyone thought. Monasteries provided structure, routine, community. For someone with depression or anxiety, that could be genuinely therapeutic. The prayers and rituals gave meaning. The simple life reduced stress. The community provided support. Physical treatments like baths, massage, gentle herbs. Sometimes these helped too. Not because they balanced humors, but because they provided comfort and care, which has genuine psychological value. Even some of the spiritual treatments had merit. Confession, for instance, could function like therapy, giving people a chance to voice their fears and burdens to a trusted authority figure. Pilgrimages got people moving, provided goals and purpose, removed them from triggering environments. But these benefits were accidental. No one understood the actual mechanisms at work. And for every person who found help, dozens suffered under treatments that made their conditions worse. Because you can't exorcise depression. You can't bleed away schizophrenia. You can't drill a hole in someone's head to cure epilepsy. Medieval medicine failed mental illness patients even more catastrophically than it failed physical illness patients. Because at least with physical illness, sometimes the body healed itself despite the treatment. But mental illness requires understanding, compassion, appropriate intervention. Things medieval medicine simply couldn't provide. They knew suffering. They just didn't have the words for it. And so they did what humans have always done when faced with the incomprehensible. They named it, feared it, and tried to survive it. But the real tragedy wasn't the failed treatments or even the suffering they caused. The real tragedy was that it would take centuries before anyone questioned the fundamental assumptions, before anyone realized that mental illness wasn't about humors or demons, but about the brain itself. Those centuries of lost knowledge, lost understanding, lost compassion. That's the true cost of medieval medicine's failure to understand the mind. Not everything in medieval medicine was wrong. Let's be clear about that. Amid all the bloodletting and exorcisms and trepanation, there were some things that actually worked, mostly plants. Medieval herbalism was sophisticated in ways that modern people often don't appreciate. Centuries of careful observation had taught healers which plants helped with which conditions. Monasteries maintained extensive herb gardens. Wise women in villages passed down knowledge through generations. Physicians studied texts describing hundreds of medicinal plants. Some of this knowledge was genuinely useful. Some of it was based on sound empirical observation, and some of it, we've since discovered, was actually correct at a chemical level, even though medieval people had no way of knowing why it worked. Let's start with the successes. Willow bark for pain and fever. Medieval people didn't know that willow bark contains salicylic acid, the compound that would eventually be synthesized into aspirin. They just knew that if you chewed willow bark or made it into a tea, it helped with headaches and brought down fevers. And it worked. It actually worked. Not as effectively as modern aspirin and with more side effects, but it provided genuine relief. This wasn't placebo, this was chemistry. Digitalis from foxglove for heart conditions. This one's particularly interesting because foxglove is extremely poisonous. Get the dose wrong and you're dead. But if you get it right, if you use tiny, carefully measured amounts, it can help regulate heart rhythm and strengthen the heartbeat. Medieval healers knew this. They understood that foxglove was dangerous but also potentially healing. They used it sparingly, carefully, only for serious conditions. And sometimes it saved lives. Modern medicine still uses digitalis, though now we can synthesize it and control the dosage with precision medieval herbalists could never achieve. Opium poppy for pain. This one needs no explanation. Opium is powerfully effective at relieving pain. Medieval people knew it, used it, and yes, became addicted to it, though they didn't understand addiction the way we do. Willow bark, foxglove, opium, these weren't folk remedies or old wives' tales. These were effective medicines derived from plants, used by trained physicians and village healers alike. But here's where it gets complicated. Medieval herbalism wasn't based on chemistry or pharmacology. It was based on the doctrine of signatures, a theory that God had marked plants with signs indicating their uses. A plant with heart-shaped leaves must be good for the heart. A plant with red sap must be good for blood disorders. Yellow flowers? Obviously good for jaundice. This theory was wrong, completely wrong, but by sheer coincidence, it sometimes led to correct applications. And then there was astrology. Medieval herbalists believed that plants had to be harvested at specific times, under specific astrological conditions, for them to work properly. You couldn't just pick herbs whenever you felt like it. You had to consult the stars, wait for the right moon phase, consider which planets were in ascendance. Did any of that matter? No. The chemical compounds in the plants don't change based on the position of Mars. But as long as they were picking the right plants and using them correctly, the astrological timing was just harmless superstition. The problem came when theory led them astray, because for every herb that actually worked, there were dozens that did nothing or actively caused harm. Eye bright for eye problems seems logical, right? It's even in the name, except it doesn't actually do anything for your eyes. It's just a plant that was named based on the doctrine of signatures and wishful thinking. Lungwort for lung diseases. Same problem. It has spotted leaves that vaguely resemble diseased lung tissue, so surely it must cure lung problems. It doesn't. But these were harmless compared to some other medieval favorites. Belladonna, deadly nightshade, was used for all sorts of conditions. The name literally means beautiful lady, because Italian women would put drops of it in their eyes to dilate their pupils, which was considered attractive. But belladonna is seriously toxic. It contains tropane alkaloids that can cause hallucinations, seizures, and death. Medieval physicians used it as a painkiller, a sedative, a treatment for respiratory problems. Sometimes it helped. More often, it poisoned people. Mercury was another favorite, especially for treating syphilis. The saying went, "A night with Venus, a lifetime with Mercury," because Mercury could suppress some symptoms of syphilis, at least temporarily. It also caused tremors, tooth loss, kidney damage, and slow, agonizing mercury poisoning. The treatment was often worse than the disease. But since syphilis was eventually fatal, people were willing to try anything. Lead was used too, for everything from cosmetics to medicines. Wealthy women would paint their faces with lead-based white makeup, slowly poisoning themselves in the name of beauty. Physicians would prescribe lead compounds for digestive problems, completely unaware that they were giving patients heavy metal poisoning. Then there was theriac, the medieval wonder drug. Theriac was an incredibly complex mixture, sometimes containing 60 or more ingredients: crushed vipers, opium, dozens of herbs, wine, honey. The recipe varied, but the basic idea was the same. Throw everything potentially medicinal into a jar, mix it up, and you've got a cure-all. It was expensive, prestigious. Kings and popes swore by it. Physicians prescribed it for everything from plague to indigestion. Did it work? Well, some versions contained opium, so it probably made you feel better. The wine probably helped too in its own way, but most of the ingredients were useless. You were paying a fortune for a placebo with occasional psychoactive effects. The real problem with medieval herbalism wasn't that the herbs didn't work. Some did. The problem was that they had no way to systematically determine which ones worked, why they worked, or what the correct dosages were. They couldn't run controlled trials, couldn't isolate active ingredients, couldn't distinguish between correlation and causation. If you gave someone willow bark and they got better, was it the willow bark? Or would they have gotten better anyway? Or did they get better because they rested while taking the medicine? Or because they were getting better care and attention? No way to know. So herbs that worked got mixed in with herbs that did nothing and herbs that were actively harmful, and there was no systematic way to sort them out. Dosage was another nightmare. How much is the right amount? Too little, and it won't work. Too much and it might kill you. Medieval measures were imprecise. A pinch of this, a handful of that. Boil until it looks right. With harmless herbs, imprecise dosing didn't matter much. With powerful or toxic herbs, it was the difference between medicine and poison. Take foxglove again. The difference between a therapeutic dose and a lethal dose is small, and the amount of active compound varies from plant to plant, even within the same species. One foxglove might be twice as potent as another. Medieval herbalists knew this was dangerous. They tried to be careful, but people died, often, from herbs that were supposed to cure them. And then there were the combination effects. Taking multiple herbs at once could create interactions that no one understood. One herb might make another more potent, or less potent, or toxic. Modern pharmacology spends enormous resources studying drug interactions. Medieval herbalists just guessed. Despite all this, some healers developed remarkable skill. The best herbalists learned to recognize plants precisely, to prepare them correctly, to adjust dosages based on the patient's size and condition. They built up knowledge through careful observation and passed it down through apprenticeship. Village-wise women often knew more practical medicine than university-trained physicians. Because physicians were busy studying Galen and arguing about humors, while wise women were actually treating sick people day after day, learning what worked and what didn't. But their knowledge was often dismissed as superstition, or worse, witchcraft. Because they couldn't explain their methods in terms of humoral theory, they just knew that this herb helped with that problem because they'd seen it work hundreds of times. Some of the most effective medieval medicines came from wise women's traditions. Ergot for inducing labor, St. John's wort for mild depression, valerian for anxiety and insomnia. Modern research has confirmed that these plants actually contain active compounds that affect the conditions they were traditionally used for. The wise women were right, even if they couldn't explain why in scientific terms. But they were also sometimes wrong, and when they were wrong, people died. Pennyroyal for inducing abortion. It works, sort of. It can cause miscarriage. It can also cause fatal liver damage. Women died using pennyroyal, but the practice continued because the desperation to end unwanted pregnancies outweighed the known risks. Mandrake root was believed to have magical properties. It was harvested with elaborate rituals because people believed it screamed when pulled from the ground. It was used as an anesthetic, and it does have mild sedative properties. But it's also toxic, hallucinogenic, and unreliable in its effects. Medieval people loved complex herbal preparations. The more ingredients, the better. The logic was that if you threw enough potentially helpful things together, something would work. It was medicine by volume, by overwhelming the disease with botanical variety, but complexity made it impossible to know what was actually helping. If your mixture contained 30 herbs and the patient got better, which herb did it? All of them? None of them? Was it even the herbs? Or just time and the body's natural healing? No way to tell. This is why modern medicine eventually moved toward isolation and purification. Instead of giving you willow bark tea with its dozens of compounds, we give you aspirin, one specific compound in a precise dose. Instead of raw opium with all its variable alkaloids, we have morphine, codeine, synthetic opioids, each with known effects and dosages. But medieval herbalists didn't have chemistry. They didn't have any way to break plants down into their components. So they worked with whole plants, complex mixtures, and a lot of guesswork. Still, we shouldn't dismiss medieval herbalism entirely. It kept people alive when nothing else could. It provided genuine relief for genuine suffering. And it laid the groundwork for modern pharmacology, even if the path from medieval herb garden to modern pharmacy was long and winding. Every modern medicine derived from plants, and there are hundreds of them, owes something to those medieval herbalists who observed, experimented, and recorded their findings. They were right about willow bark, and that led to aspirin. They were right about foxglove, and that led to cardiac glycosides. They were right about opium, and that led to the entire class of opioid painkillers. They were even partly right about moldy bread. Some healers would pack wounds with bread mold, and sometimes it prevented infection. They didn't know about penicillin, but they stumbled onto something real. Medieval herbalism was a mixed bag, genuine medicine mixed with useless superstition, mixed with dangerous poison. The healers meant well. They tried hard. They sometimes succeeded. But without the scientific method, without controlled trials, without chemistry and biology and all the tools that make modern medicine work, they were essentially flying blind. Some herbs helped, some did nothing, some killed, and telling the difference was mostly luck. We need to talk about the Black Death, because if there was ever a moment when medieval medicine was tested and found catastrophically wanting, it was the plague years of the 14th century, 1347. The same year we've been visiting in our thought experiments. The same year when humoral theory and bloodletting and leech therapy were standard medical practice. And then the ships arrived, merchant vessels from the east, carrying silk and spices and something else. something that would kill between 1/3 and 1/2 of Europe's entire population within 5 years. Yersinia pestis, the plague bacterium, though medieval people had no way of knowing that's what it was. The symptoms appeared suddenly. You'd feel fine in the morning. By afternoon, you'd have a fever. By evening, you'd notice painful swellings in your armpits, neck, or groin. Buboes, they were called. Egg-sized lumps that turned your lymph nodes into agonizing masses of infected tissue. Then came the fever, properly speaking, not the gentle fevers medieval physicians were used to treating. This was different, higher, more persistent, accompanied by chills that made you shake violently, even as your skin burned. Vomiting, diarrhea, delirium, black spots appearing on your skin as your blood vessels failed and tissue died. Hence the name, Black Death. From first symptoms to death usually took 3 to 5 days, sometimes less. Occasionally, if you were very unlucky, you'd linger for a week or more, and medieval medicine had absolutely no idea what to do about it. They tried everything in their arsenal, everything they'd been trained to do, everything that had worked or seemed to work for other diseases. Bloodletting. If plague was caused by corrupted humors, then draining the bad blood should help, right? Except it didn't. Weakening already dying patients just made them die faster. Leeches. Same principle, same failure. Lancing the buboes. This one actually made sense in a horrific way. The buboes were clearly infected, clearly full of poison. So cut them open, drain the pus, let the corruption out. Sometimes this even seemed to help. Relieving the pressure reduced pain temporarily. But without antibiotics, without any way to actually fight the bacterial infection, all you were doing was creating another wound for the plague to ravage. Cauterization, burn the buboes, drive out the disease with purifying fire. All this did was add burn injuries to plague symptoms. Not helpful. Herbal remedies. Every plant that had ever been used for fever or infection was tried. Theriac, that expensive cure-all, was in high demand. People paid fortunes for it. It didn't work. Nothing worked. Prayers, processions, flagellants whipping themselves in the streets to appease God's wrath. Because surely this plague was divine punishment for humanity's sins. Nothing else could explain such devastation. The church organized mass prayers, confession, communion, anything to win back God's favor. Priests went among the dying, administering last rites, offering spiritual comfort when no physical comfort was possible. And the priests died too, in droves. Because plague doesn't care about your religious devotion or your medical training. Medieval physicians did try to understand what was happening. They developed theories. Bad air, miasma, was a popular explanation. The plague was caused by corrupted atmosphere, perhaps from earthquakes releasing poisonous vapors, or from the alignment of planets creating unfortunate atmospheric conditions. This led to some interesting preventative measures. People carried pomanders, little balls filled with aromatic herbs and spices, believing the good smells would ward off the bad air. Vinegar-soaked cloths were held over nose and mouth. Fires were kept burning constantly to purify the air. None of it helped because the plague wasn't caused by bad air. It was caused by bacteria carried by fleas that lived on rats. But medieval people had no way of knowing that. Some physicians noticed that plague seemed to spread from person to person. They recommended isolation, quarantine. Don't go near sick people. Don't touch the dead. This was actually good advice, though for the wrong reasons. They thought they were avoiding corrupted air around plague victims. They were actually avoiding flea transmission and the pneumonic form of plague, which could spread through respiratory droplets. But even correct practices couldn't do much when the plague was everywhere, when rats and fleas infested every home, when dead bodies piled up faster than they could be buried, when entire families died within days, leaving no one to even record their passing. Medieval medicine's failure during the Black Death was comprehensive and total. Nothing worked. Not bloodletting, not herbs, not prayers, not amulets or charms or expensive theriac or any of the countless remedies desperate people tried. People died in their beds, in the streets, in churches where they'd gone to pray for salvation, wealthy and poor, young and old, sinners and saints. The plague took them all, and doctors died too, because they went among the sick, because they tried to help, because their understanding of disease didn't protect them from it. Some physicians fled, left their cities and their patients, and ran for the countryside, hoping to escape the contagion. Can you blame them? They had families. They had no effective treatments. Staying meant almost certain death to no purpose, but others stayed, kept treating patients even as colleagues died around them, kept trying remedies even when nothing worked, kept recording symptoms and observations even though they had no theoretical framework for understanding what they were seeing. The plague exposed every weakness in medieval medicine, every wrong theory, every useless treatment, every gap in understanding. They believed disease was caused by imbalanced humors. Plague didn't care about humors. They believed the stars influenced health. Plague killed under any astrological sign. They believed God sent disease as punishment. Plague killed the pious as readily as the sinful. Every certainty was shaken. Every authority questioned. If Galen and Hippocrates and Avicenna and all the learned physicians couldn't explain or treat the plague, what good was their learning? Some people lost faith in medicine entirely, turned to folk healers, tried magical remedies, wore amulets, anything that offered even false hope. Others lost faith in God. If this was divine punishment, it seemed monstrously excessive. If this was a test, it was impossible to pass. The psychological and spiritual damage was as devastating as the physical death toll. But here's something remarkable. Some people survived. Not many. Maybe 20 to 30% of those who caught the plague. But some immune systems were strong enough or lucky enough to fight off the infection. They got sick, developed the buboes, ran the fever, and then miraculously recovered. Medieval physicians studied these survivors intensely. What made them different? What treatments had they received? What could be learned? Nothing useful, as it turned out. Survivors seemed random, no consistent pattern to their treatments or characteristics. Some had been bled, some hadn't. Some had used herbal remedies, some had only prayed. The only consistent factor was that they were the lucky ones whose immune systems had successfully fought off the bacteria. But medieval physicians couldn't see immune systems, couldn't understand microbiology, couldn't recognize that survival was individual biology, not medical intervention. So they kept bleeding, kept applying leeches, kept prescribing herbs. Because what else could they do? Admit that medicine was useless, that everything they'd trained for, everything they believed, was inadequate in the face of this catastrophe? Some did admit it. Giovanni Boccaccio, writing during the plague, noted that physicians were no more successful than anyone else at treating or preventing the disease, that their elaborate theories didn't save them from dying alongside their patients. But most physicians clung to their training, modified their approaches, invented new theories to explain why traditional methods weren't working as expected, because the alternative, admitting total ignorance, was too devastating. The Black Death changed European medicine, but not in the ways you might expect. It didn't lead to immediate scientific revolution, didn't cause physicians to abandon humoral theory or develop new methods. In fact, in many ways, it reinforced reliance on traditional practices, because in the face of such overwhelming crisis, people clung to familiar frameworks, even when those frameworks failed. But it did plant seeds of doubt, made some physicians more willing to question authority, more willing to look for new explanations when old ones proved inadequate, and it showed with terrible clarity that human knowledge had limits, that there were forces in nature that medicine couldn't control or even understand. The plague returned repeatedly over the next several centuries. Each outbreak was devastating. Each time, medieval medicine proved equally helpless. Physicians tried new variations on old treatments, adjusted their theories. But fundamentally, they had no more success in 1500 than they'd had in 1347. It wouldn't be until the late 19th century, when scientists finally understood germ theory and identified Yersinia pestis, that medicine could effectively fight plague. With antibiotics, plague became treatable, survivable. But for those 500 years in between, plague remained medicine's greatest failure. A reminder that sometimes nature was stronger than any doctor. That sometimes prayer was all you had left. That sometimes the only sensible response was to run and hope you were fast enough. Medieval physicians faced the Black Death with courage, with dedication, with every tool and theory they possessed. And it wasn't enough, not even close. We need to talk about the healers who don't usually make it into medical histories. The ones who delivered most babies, treated most illnesses, and kept most communities alive Despite having no university training, no prestigious credentials, and no recognition from the male-dominated medical establishment, midwives and wise women. These were the backbone of medieval healthcare for most people, because here's the reality. Physicians were expensive. They served the wealthy, the nobility, the urban elite. If you were a peasant, a laborer, a common person living in a village or small town, you probably never saw a trained physician in your entire life. But you did see the village wise woman, the midwife, the herbalist, the woman who'd been helping with births and illnesses for decades, learning from her mother and grandmother, passing knowledge down through generations of women. Let's start with childbirth, because this is where these women were absolutely essential. Pregnancy and childbirth were by far the most dangerous things a medieval woman would experience. Maternal mortality rates were staggering. Something like 1 to 2% of births resulted in the mother's death. And given that women might have 6, 8, 10 pregnancies in their lifetime, the cumulative risk was enormous. Infection, hemorrhage, obstructed labor, eclampsia, dozens of complications that modern medicine can handle, but medieval medicine could not. Male physicians generally stayed away from childbirth. It was considered women's work, improper for a man to be present at such an intimate moment. So midwives handled it all, and they got remarkably good at it. A skilled midwife knew how to turn a breech baby, how to recognize signs of obstructed labor, and manually reposition the child, how to deliver twins, how to deal with hemorrhaging after delivery. She knew which herbs could speed labor, which could stop bleeding, which could help with milk production. She also knew when a situation was hopeless, when the baby was too large or positioned impossibly, when the mother was bleeding out and nothing could save her. In those terrible moments, her job was to baptize the baby if possible, to ensure its soul would be saved, even if its body couldn't be. Midwives worked with their hands. They examined women internally to assess labor progression, something physicians wouldn't do. They had techniques passed down through generations. They knew that walking helped labor progress, that certain positions made delivery easier, that keeping the mother calm and supported improved outcomes. Were they perfect? No. Plenty of women died in childbirth despite the midwife's best efforts. Babies died too. Infection was common because nobody understood the need for hand washing or sterilization. But midwives had something physicians often lacked: experience. A physician might study texts about childbirth without ever attending a delivery. A midwife might attend hundreds in her lifetime. She learned what worked through direct observation and practice. Village-wise women filled a similar role for general medicine. They were the people you went to when you had a cough, a rash, a wound, digestive problems, anything that needed treatment, but didn't justify the expense of a physician. These women maintained herb gardens, knew which plants helped with which ailments, prepared poultices, tinctures, teas, salves. They set broken bones, stitched wounds, pulled teeth, treated skin conditions, basically handled all the minor to moderate medical issues that made up the vast majority of healthcare needs. Their knowledge was empirical rather than theoretical. They didn't care about humoral theory or ancient texts. They cared about what worked. If a particular herb helped with headaches, they used it. If a poultice reduced inflammation, they made it. Simple, practical, effective. This actually gave them an advantage over university-trained physicians in some ways. They weren't constrained by theory. If the theory said one thing but experience showed another, they trusted experience. But it also meant their knowledge was limited to what they could directly observe. They couldn't explain why remedies worked, couldn't generalize principles to new situations. Their expertise was deep but narrow, specific to the conditions they regularly encountered. The relationship between wise women and the medical establishment was complicated and often hostile. Physicians saw these women as competition, uneducated charlatans taking business away from properly trained professionals. The fact that wise women often got better results didn't help. It just made physicians more resentful. The church was suspicious too. Women claiming healing knowledge without formal training, without male supervision, using herbs and charms and traditional practices that might have pre-Christian origins. That sounded dangerously like witchcraft. And in the later medieval period, during the witch hunts, this suspicion turned deadly. Wise women and healers were disproportionately targeted. Their knowledge of herbs made them suspect. Their ability to help or harm with medicines made them seem supernaturally powerful. Their independence and authority in their communities made them threatening. Thousands of women healers were executed as witches. Their knowledge was lost. Their practices were suppressed. It was a catastrophe for women's health and for medical knowledge generally. But before the witch hunts intensified, wise women occupied an interesting space in medieval society. They were respected in their communities, sought after, trusted. They had authority and autonomy that women in other roles rarely enjoyed. A midwife could walk through town at any hour, entering homes, seeing women in vulnerable states, commanding the respect due to someone who held life and death in their hands. She wasn't subservient to male authority in her professional capacity. The birthing room was her domain. Wise women, similarly, had power. They knew secrets, knew which plants could induce abortion, though this was dangerous and illegal, knew love potions and fertility treatments, knew how to help and how to harm. This knowledge gave them leverage, influence, sometimes wealth, but it also made them vulnerable, because knowledge is power, and women with power have always made certain people nervous. The medical practices of midwives and wise women were a mix of effective remedies, harmless superstition, and occasionally dangerous errors, just like formal medicine. They used comfrey for wounds, and it helped because comfrey contains allantoin, which promotes cell growth. They used chamomile for digestive issues, and it worked because chamomile has genuine anti-inflammatory properties. They used lavender for anxiety, and it helped because lavender actually does have mild sedative effects. But they also used practices based on sympathetic magic, carrying a rabbit's foot for luck, wearing amulets, timing treatments by moon phases, mumbling incantations while preparing medicines. Did these things help? Only psychologically, through placebo effect and the comfort of ritual. And sometimes they made mistakes, used the wrong plant and poisoned someone, misjudged a dose, attempted a medical intervention beyond their skill level, and caused harm. But their error rate was probably similar to that of trained physicians. Everyone was working with limited knowledge and crude tools. Everyone sometimes failed. The question was whether you failed with or without expensive credentials. One area where wise women excelled was women's health beyond childbirth, menstrual problems, menopause, contraception, gynecological issues. These weren't topics male physicians wanted to deal with, and women often preferred to discuss them with other women anyway. Wise women knew herbs that could regulate periods, ease cramping, reduce menopause symptoms, help with fertility, or prevent pregnancy. Some of this knowledge was genuinely useful, some was superstition, but it was knowledge that was shared woman to woman, in spaces where male physicians never went. They also dealt with sexual health, treated sexually transmitted infections as best they could, helped women in abusive situations, provided care that was non-judgmental and discreet, unlike the moral lecturing women might get from male physicians or priests. This made wise women essential to women's survival and well-being in ways that formal medicine never addressed. But history has mostly forgotten them. We have records of prominent physicians. We know their names, their theories, their writings. Wise women and midwives rarely left written records. Their knowledge was oral. Their practices were informal. They appear in historical documents mainly when something went wrong, when they were accused of malpractice or witchcraft. Yet they were the ones who actually kept most people alive, who delivered most babies, who treated most illnesses, who provided most of the day-to-day health care that medieval people relied on. Medieval medicine wasn't just what happened in universities and physicians' clinics. It was also what happened in cottages and birthing rooms and herb gardens. It was women's knowledge as much as men's, practical experience as much as theoretical study. And in many ways, the wise women's approach, observation-based, empirical, flexible, was closer to the scientific method than the rigid theoretical approach of university physicians. If medieval medicine had listened more to the women who actually delivered results, and less to the men who insisted on ancient theories, healthcare might have improved faster. But that's not how power worked in medieval society. And so knowledge stayed fragmented. Physicians dismissed wise women. Wise women had no access to formal education, and patients suffered from this division. The irony is that some of the most effective medieval medical practices, the ones that actually helped people, came from wise women's traditions. Herbal remedies that modern pharmacology has validated, birthing techniques that are still used, Common sense hygiene and care practices that physicians overlooked. They knew, the women knew. They just weren't allowed to teach it formally, weren't allowed to write it down, weren't allowed to claim authority, but they practiced it anyway, passed it down anyway, saved lives anyway, and that matters more than credentials ever could. Let's talk about the treatments that were supposed to cure you, but instead hastened your death. Because medieval medicine didn't just fail passively, it actively killed people, regularly, with treatments that were considered standard, respectable, and well-intentioned. We've already covered bloodletting and how it weakened patients who needed all their strength to fight illness. But that was just the beginning. Purgatives and emetics were medieval medicine's other favorite interventions. If bloodletting drained bad humors from your veins, purging drained them from your digestive system. The logic was impeccable. The results were catastrophic. Purgatives are medications that cause severe diarrhea. Emetics cause vomiting. Medieval physicians used both enthusiastically and often simultaneously. You'd come to a physician with, say, a stomachache. He'd diagnose excess of black bile or yellow bile accumulating in your digestive tract. The solution? Get it out. Violently. He'd give you a purgative made from plants like senna, aloe, or colocynth. These are powerful laxatives that cause cramping and rapid, forceful evacuation of your bowels. You'd spend hours or even days on the privy, losing fluids, losing nutrients, losing strength. If that wasn't enough, he'd give you an emetic, ipecac root, white hellebore, sometimes just salt water. Anything to make you vomit repeatedly until your stomach was completely empty. The theory was that you'd vomit up the corrupted humors, purge them from your system, emerge cleansed and balanced. The reality was dehydration, electrolyte imbalance, exhaustion, malnutrition. You'd be so weak from purging that you couldn't fight off whatever illness you actually had. For some patients, especially elderly or already weakened ones, this treatment was essentially a death sentence. They'd die from dehydration before their original illness could kill them, but physicians saw the weakness and pallor and assumed the humors were being successfully drained. They'd continue the treatment, giving more purgatives, more emetics, until the patient was so depleted they couldn't recover. Mercury is another medieval favorite that killed far more people than it helped. Mercury compounds were used for everything from syphilis to constipation to skin conditions. Mercury does have some genuine medical properties. It's toxic to bacteria and parasites. For syphilis, mercury could suppress symptoms temporarily because it killed the bacteria, sort of, but it also poisoned the patient. Mercury accumulates in your body. Your kidneys can't filter it out effectively. Over time, with repeated treatments, you develop mercury poisoning, tremors, tooth loss, kidney damage, neurological problems, personality changes. There was a saying, a night with Venus, a lifetime with Mercury. Because syphilis treatment with mercury went on for months or years. Patients would take mercury pills, apply mercury ointments, even inhale mercury vapors. The treatment was almost as destructive as the disease. Many people died from mercury poisoning while still suffering from syphilis. They'd endured months of toxic treatment only to die anyway. But mercury was prestigious medicine, expensive. Only the wealthy could afford extended mercury treatment. Poor people with syphilis just suffered without treatment, and ironically, some of them lived longer because they weren't being slowly poisoned by their medicine. Antimony was another toxic metal widely used in medieval medicine. Antimony pills were given as purgatives. They caused such violent vomiting and diarrhea that they were called perpetual pills because you could recover them from your stool and reuse them. Yes, people would actually fish pills out of their own excrement and swallow them again. Medieval medicine was not for the squeamish. Antimony poisoning causes similar symptoms to mercury: gastrointestinal distress, neurological damage, organ failure. But it was considered excellent medicine because it produced such dramatic effects. Lead was everywhere in medieval life. Lead cosmetics, lead-glazed pottery, lead water pipes in wealthy homes, and lead medicines. Lead acetate was called sugar of lead because it tasted sweet. It was used as a sweetener in wine and as a treatment for various conditions. Chronic lead exposure causes learning disabilities, behavioral problems, kidney damage, and reproductive issues. Medieval people didn't connect these symptoms to lead because the poisoning was slow and cumulative. They just thought some people were naturally dim or sickly. Then there were the extreme heat and cold treatments. Medieval physicians believed in using opposites to balance the humors. If you had a hot-wet condition, you needed cold-dry treatment. This led to some truly brutal practices. Patients with high fevers were sometimes plunged into ice water or packed in snow. The shock could kill them. Even if they survived, the treatment was agony. Others with cold conditions were subjected to extreme heat, prolonged sweat baths, heated stones placed directly on skin. The goal was to drive out the cold humor by overwhelming it with heat. Burns, heat stroke, shock. The complications were severe, but physicians persisted because the theory demanded it. Cauterization, which we've touched on, deserves more attention as a deadly treatment. Physicians used hot irons not just for surgery, but as treatment for internal illnesses. Have a pain in your side? Let me burn your skin there to drive out the disease. Suffering from headaches? Cautery to the temples. Lung problems? Burn your chest. The pain was excruciating, the burns often got infected, and the underlying conditions weren't helped at all because burning your skin doesn't cure internal organs. But cautery was considered powerful medicine. The more painful the treatment, the more effective it must be. This belief led to increasingly aggressive use of burning, blistering, and scarring treatments. Blistering agents like Spanish fly, cantharides, were applied to skin to raise huge, painful blisters. The fluid from these blisters was thought to contain corrupted humors. In reality, you were just damaging your skin and creating wounds that could easily become infected. Trepanation, drilling holes in skulls, killed many patients. Even if you survived the procedure, infection was almost guaranteed. Your skull is supposed to be a sealed, protective case for your brain. Making holes in it is asking for trouble. But trepanation was performed for headaches, mental illness, epilepsy, head injuries. Any condition that seemed related to the head was potentially treatable by drilling. The logic being that pressure was building up inside the skull and needed release. Some people did survive trepanation. We have skulls showing healed trepanation holes, proving the person lived for years afterward. But we don't know how many died, how many developed brain infections, how many suffered worse symptoms after the procedure than before. The mortality rate was probably over 50%, but for someone with debilitating chronic headaches or epileptic seizures, desperate enough to try anything, those odds might have seemed acceptable. Arsenic was another popular poison medicine, used for skin conditions, fever, pain. Arsenic does kill parasites and bacteria. It also kills people, slowly and painfully. Medieval physicians used arsenic in small doses, believing it strengthened the body. Some of it did work as intended, killing infections. But chronic arsenic exposure causes cancer, organ damage, skin lesions, neurological problems. Patients being treated with arsenic might feel temporarily better as the medicine killed whatever was infecting them. But if treatment continued, they'd develop arsenic poisoning and die from the cure instead of the disease. The fundamental problem with all these treatments was the same. Medieval physicians had no way to measure toxicity scientifically. They couldn't do blood tests, couldn't track organ function, couldn't distinguish between therapeutic effects and poisonous effects. If a patient got worse after treatment, that might mean the disease was too advanced, or it might mean the dose wasn't strong enough, or it might mean the humors were being successfully purged and the patient just needed to endure a little longer. There was no clear feedback mechanism to tell physicians when they were helping versus when they were harming. So treatments that killed people slowly were continued for generations. Mercury treatment for syphilis went on for centuries despite its obvious toxicity. Bloodletting persisted into the 19th century despite countless deaths. Purgatives and emetics remained standard practice long after evidence showed they were harmful. Why did medieval medicine cling to deadly treatments for so long? Partly because the theoretical framework demanded them. If humors needed balancing, and bloodletting balanced humors, then bloodletting must continue regardless of outcomes. Partly because some patients did get better, and physicians attributed recovery to their treatments rather than to natural healing. Confirmation bias at a massive, centuries-long scale. Partly because admitting these treatments were harmful would mean admitting the entire theoretical basis of medicine was wrong. That was unthinkable. Easier to assume the treatment was right and the patient just couldn't be saved. And partly because there weren't better alternatives. Without understanding disease mechanisms, without effective medicines, physicians had to do something. Doing nothing felt like giving up. So they did what they'd been taught, even when it killed people. The tragedy is that medieval physicians genuinely believed they were helping. They weren't sadists. They weren't incompetent. They were working within a paradigm that was fundamentally flawed, but that made internal sense. From within that paradigm, bloodletting was logical, mercury was medicine, purging was therapeutic. The fact that these treatments killed people didn't disprove the theory. It just meant the disease was too severe, or the patient too weak, or God's will too mysterious. Medieval medicine killed through ignorance, not malice, but the patients were just as dead either way. And that's perhaps the darkest truth about medieval medicine. The people trying hardest to save you were often the ones most effectively killing you. The more aggressively they treated you, the worse your chances of survival. Sometimes the luckiest patients were the ones too poor to afford medical care, who stayed home, rested, let their bodies heal naturally, who couldn't pay for the bloodletting and mercury and purgatives that would have killed them. They survived through neglect while the wealthy died from treatment. Medieval medicine, at its worst, was an elaborate, expensive way to hasten death while believing you were fighting it. The road to hell, paved with good intentions and deadly remedies. Not everyone believed. That's the thing about medieval medicine that often gets overlooked. Yes, humoral theory dominated. Yes, bloodletting was standard practice. Yes, the ancient authorities were revered. But there were always questioners. Always people who looked at the results and wondered if maybe, just maybe, something was wrong with the entire system. These doubters were rare. They were often marginalized. Sometimes they were punished for their heresy against medical orthodoxy. But they existed, and their skepticism planted seeds that would eventually grow into the scientific revolution. Let's start with the anatomists, the people who wanted to actually look inside human bodies and see how they worked, rather than just reading what Galen said about anatomy. Dissection was controversial. The church had complicated rules about it. Human bodies were sacred, made in God's image, destined for resurrection. Cutting them open seemed disrespectful at best, sacrilegious at worst. But some physicians argued that understanding God's creation was itself a form of worship, that studying anatomy revealed divine design, that you couldn't effectively heal bodies without understanding how they were constructed. In the later medieval period, particularly in Italian universities, human dissection became more accepted, not common, but permitted under strict conditions. Usually using the bodies of executed criminals, people whose souls were already damned, and whose bodies could therefore be used for the benefit of others. These early dissections were public events. The physician would read from Galen, while a barber-surgeon did the actual cutting. The goal wasn't to discover anything new, but to confirm what the ancient texts said. Except sometimes, the body didn't match the text. Galen had described anatomy based on animal dissections, particularly apes and pigs. He'd never systematically dissected human bodies, so some of his descriptions were wrong. The structure of the liver was different in humans. The pattern of blood vessels wasn't quite what he'd described. Small details, but noticeable. What did early anatomists do when they found these discrepancies? Mostly, they assumed they'd found an abnormal body. The text was correct. This particular corpse was just unusual. Deviation from the norm. But a very few started to wonder. If Galen was wrong about small anatomical details, might he be wrong about larger principles? If the authority could err, what else might be mistaken? These doubts were whispered, not shouted. Medical education was built on respect for authority. Questioning Galen or Hippocrates or Avicenna was like questioning scripture. You didn't do it lightly. But doubt once planted grows. In the Islamic world, physicians like Al-Razi and Ibn Sina had already questioned some of Galen's theories. They'd conducted their own observations, made their own experiments, developed their own ideas about disease and treatment. Their works were translated into Latin and made their way to European universities. Here were respected authorities disagreeing with other respected authorities, which meant authority itself became questionable. If Al-Razi said one thing and Galen said another, both couldn't be right. Someone had to be wrong. And if one ancient authority could be wrong, maybe they all could be. This was dangerous thinking, revolutionary thinking, the kind of thinking that could undermine the entire foundation of medieval medicine. Some physicians responded by trying to reconcile the contradictions, finding ways to interpret the texts so everyone was technically correct. Medieval scholars were very good at this kind of intellectual gymnastics. But others started to prioritize observation over authority. If you saw something with your own eyes that contradicted the text, maybe your eyes were right and the text was wrong. This shift seems obvious to us now. Of course you should trust observation over ancient writings, but in medieval times it was radical. The ancients were wiser, more learned, closer to original truth. Moderns were degraded, fallen, less capable of understanding deep truths. Trusting your own observations over ancient wisdom was arrogant, presumptuous, possibly heretical, but some did it anyway. Physicians who noticed that bloodletting seemed to make patients worse, not better. Who saw that certain herbal remedies consistently helped while others consistently failed. Who recognized patterns that the theories didn't explain. They couldn't publish their doubts openly, couldn't challenge the medical establishment directly, but they could modify their practices, use less aggressive bloodletting, rely more on remedies that worked, and less on theoretical treatments that didn't. These incremental changes, these small rebellions against orthodoxy, were the beginning of scientific medicine. The Black Death accelerated this process. When established medicine failed so completely, so catastrophically, it created space for alternatives, for new ideas, for questioning whether the old ways were really the best ways. Some physicians after the plague started keeping more careful records, documenting what treatments they tried and what results they got, not just recording successes but also failures, starting to look for patterns in the data rather than just confirming theory. This was primitive compared to modern clinical trials. They had no control groups, no statistical analysis, no understanding of confounding variables. But it was a start. It was observation-based medicine beginning to emerge from theory-based medicine. The printing press, invented in the mid-15th century, changed everything. Medical knowledge could now spread quickly. Texts didn't have to be hand-copied by scribes. Ideas could circulate. Physicians in different countries could read each other's work, compare observations, build on each other's discoveries. Dissent became easier to spread too. A printed pamphlet questioning some aspect of Galenic medicine could reach thousands of readers. Authorities could ban books, but they couldn't stop ideas. The Renaissance brought renewed interest in ancient texts, but also new attitudes toward knowledge. Humanism emphasized human potential and capability. Maybe moderns could match or even surpass the ancients in some areas. Maybe progress was possible. Artists like Leonardo da Vinci began conducting detailed anatomical studies, creating drawings more accurate than any medieval text. These weren't for medical use initially, but they showed what careful observation could reveal. They demonstrated that seeing was believing, not the other way around. Paracelsus, a 16th century physician, openly rejected Galenic medicine, burned Avicenna's texts publicly, claimed that experience and experimentation were better teachers than ancient books. He was controversial, often wrong in his own theories, but influential in promoting empirical approaches. The shift from medieval to modern medicine didn't happen overnight. It took centuries. Many physicians clung to humoral theory well into the 1800s. Bloodletting persisted. Ancient authorities remained respected. But the seeds of doubt, once planted, kept growing. Every observation that contradicted theory, every treatment that failed despite being theoretically sound, every patient who got better without standard intervention, these accumulated, created cracks in the edifice of medieval medicine, made space for new ideas to take root. The real breakthrough came with the scientific method, the radical idea that theories should be tested, that observations should be systematic, that results should be repeatable, that authority matters less than evidence. Francis Bacon, in the early 17th century, laid out principles of empirical investigation. Galileo demonstrated how mathematics and experimentation could reveal truths about nature. Descartes promoted systematic doubt as a path to knowledge. These weren't medical thinkers specifically, but their ideas transformed medicine along with everything else. They created an intellectual environment where questioning authority was not just acceptable, but necessary, where observation trumped tradition, where progress was expected. William Harvey in 1628 proved that blood circulates through the body, pumped by the heart. This directly contradicted Galenic theory, which held that blood was produced by the liver and consumed by the body. Harvey used careful observation, experimentation, and mathematical analysis to demonstrate circulation. His work was revolutionary, not just because he was right, but because of how he proved he was right, through observation and reason, not by appealing to ancient texts. He showed that fundamental principles of Galenic medicine were wrong, and he showed how to discover truth through investigation rather than through authority. The microscope, invented in the late 16th century and refined in the 17th, revealed entire worlds invisible to the naked eye: cells, microorganisms, bacteria. Suddenly there were explanations for disease that had nothing to do with humors or miasmas, but acceptance was slow. Many physicians rejected germ theory when it was first proposed in the 19th century, rejected the idea that invisible organisms could cause disease. It seemed as ridiculous as saying demons caused illness. Old paradigms die hard. Medical education was still based on humoral theory in many places. Physicians who trained under the old system couldn't easily abandon it. Their entire professional identity was built on knowledge that was being proven wrong. But eventually, evidence won. Not quickly, not easily, but inevitably. As microscopes improved, as controlled experiments demonstrated causal relationships, as new treatments based on germ theory saved lives, while old treatments continued to kill. Medieval medicine gave way to modern medicine, not through sudden revolution, but through gradual accumulation of doubt, question after question, observation after observation, failure after failure of the old theories to explain or treat disease effectively. The physicians who questioned, who observed, who doubted authority and trusted their own eyes, they were the bridge between medieval and modern medicine. Many of their names are forgotten. Their contributions seemed small at the time, but they mattered. Every anatomist who noticed Galen was wrong about some detail. Every physician who kept careful records of treatment outcomes. Every skeptic who wondered if bloodletting really helped. Every innovator who tried something new. They accumulated, built on each other, created momentum for change. Medieval medicine failed because it prioritized theory over observation, authority over evidence, tradition over innovation. But it also contained the seeds of its own transformation. Because humans are curious. We observe, we question, we notice when things don't work. And eventually, given enough time and enough failures, we change. The journey from medieval to modern medicine was long and painful. Millions died from preventable and treatable conditions, while physicians clung to outdated theories. But progress happened. Slowly, fitfully, 2 steps forward and 1 step back, but happening. And it started with doubt, with the courage to question, with the willingness to trust observation over authority. Those medieval skeptics, marginalized and often forgotten, they were the real heroes of medical history. Not the famous physicians, not the respected authorities, but the questioners, the doubters, the ones who looked at the evidence and said quietly, "I'm not sure this is right." They planted seeds that would eventually grow into the scientific method, evidence-based medicine, and all the miracles of modern healthcare. But in their own time, they were just troublemakers, and the establishment continued bleeding patients for centuries more. Change came, but it came slowly, paid for in blood and suffering, and countless lives lost to treatments that should have been abandoned long before they were. That's the price of progress. That's the cost of clinging to authority over evidence. That's what medieval medicine teaches us about the importance of questioning, observing, and being willing to admit when we're wrong. The seeds of change were planted in medieval times, but the harvest took centuries. For all its failures, medieval medicine did occasionally get things right, not for the right reasons, not through scientific understanding, but through careful observation, trial and error, and sheer accident. Some medieval practices actually helped people. Let's give credit where it's due. Quarantine worked. Medieval people didn't understand germ theory or disease transmission at a microbiological level, but they noticed patterns. Plague spread from person to person. The sick infected the healthy. People arriving from plague-ridden areas brought disease with them, so they developed quarantine. The word itself comes from Italian 40 giorni, 40 days. The period ships had to wait in harbor before passengers and cargo could be unloaded in plague times. 40 days was probably chosen for religious reasons. Jesus fasted for 40 days. Flood rains lasted 40 days. Seemed like a significant period. But accidentally, it was long enough for most diseases to manifest or for infected people to die. meaning the survivors were probably not contagious. Quarantine saved lives. Not everyone's lives, not enough lives, but it was one of the few effective public health measures medieval society had, and they used it. Isolation of the sick was similar. Leper colonies segregated people with leprosy from the general population. This was partly based on biblical rules about ritual purity, but it also prevented disease spread. Leprosy is only mildly contagious, but isolating patients did reduce transmission. The same principle was applied during plague years. The sick were confined to their homes, doors marked, guards posted to prevent them leaving. It was brutal. Entire families trapped together often meant everyone got infected, but it slowed the spread to other households. These practices were based on observation, not theory. Medieval people didn't know about bacteria or viruses. They couldn't explain why isolation worked. They just knew it did, at least partially. Wound care, believe it or not, was sometimes done correctly. Not always, not even usually. But some medieval practices for treating wounds were sound. Cleaning wounds with wine or vinegar. This actually made sense. The alcohol in wine has antiseptic properties. Vinegar is acidic and hostile to many bacteria. Medieval surgeons didn't know about antisepsis, but they'd observed that wine-washed wounds seemed to heal better than unwashed ones. Honey for wound dressing. Honey is naturally antibacterial. It creates an inhospitable environment for bacterial growth. It promotes healing. Medieval use of honey on wounds was traditional knowledge passed down for generations, and modern research has confirmed it works. Maggot therapy. This one sounds horrific, and it often was. But physicians noticed that wounds infested with maggots sometimes healed better than clean wounds. Why? Because certain species of maggots eat only dead tissue, cleaning the wound naturally. They also secrete substances that kill bacteria. Medieval physicians didn't understand the mechanism. They just knew that sometimes maggots helped. Modern medicine has actually revived maggot therapy for certain types of wounds because it's genuinely effective. Surgical techniques improved through practice. Barber-surgeons might not have understood anatomy well, but they got very good at specific procedures through repetition. A surgeon who'd performed 100 amputations developed skill. Speed, precision, knowledge of where to cut, how to minimize bleeding. Some medieval surgeons were genuinely talented. They could remove bladder stones through delicate internal surgery. They could repair hernias. They could treat cataracts by couching, pushing the clouded lens out of the line of sight. Were these procedures dangerous? Yes. Did many patients die from complications? Absolutely. But success rates improved with surgeon skill. The best medieval surgeons could achieve outcomes that were impressive given their limitations. Pain management had some successes. Opium poppy was known and used. It worked. It relieved pain genuinely and significantly. The problem was dosing and addiction. But for acute pain, opium was effective medicine. Alcohol was used too. Not ideal, but being drunk did reduce pain perception. A patient facing amputation without anesthesia was better off drunk than sober. Henbane, mandrake, and other sedating herbs provided some relief. Again, dosing was inconsistent, and these plants are toxic, but in the right amounts, they could help patients endure procedures. Medieval people weren't completely helpless against pain. They had options, limited and imperfect but real. Herbal remedies, as we've discussed, sometimes worked. Willow bark for pain, digitalis for heart conditions, numerous plants with genuine medicinal properties. Medieval herbalists accumulated knowledge about what worked through generations of observation. This knowledge was mixed with superstition and error, but the core of it was sound. Many modern medicines are derived from plants medieval herbalists used. We've just refined them, isolated the active compounds, controlled the dosing, but medieval people were using essentially the same medicines in cruder form and getting real therapeutic benefit. Lifestyle recommendations were often sensible. Medieval physicians emphasized the importance of diet, exercise, sleep, fresh air. Their theoretical framework for why these mattered was wrong, but the practical advice was sound. Eat a varied diet. Get regular physical activity. Sleep well. Avoid excess. Manage stress. These are still the foundation of preventive health in the 21st century. Medieval medicine understood that health was more than just treating disease, that prevention mattered, that how you lived affected how you felt. They were right about that. even if their explanations were wrong. Mental health care had some surprisingly progressive elements. Monasteries provided quiet, structured environments for people experiencing what we'd now recognize as mental health crises. This wasn't therapy in the modern sense, but it provided stability, routine, community, things that genuinely help with anxiety and depression. Music therapy was used. Medieval physicians recognized that music could soothe agitated patients, lift spirits, reduce pain perception. Modern research confirms these effects. Touch therapy, massage, was common. It helped with pain, with anxiety, with the simple human need for comforting contact. Medieval caregivers understood this intuitively. Occupational therapy existed in primitive form, getting patients involved in productive activity, giving them purpose and structure. Monasteries especially used this approach. Work as healing. These weren't based on understanding of brain chemistry or psychological theory, but they helped. They made people feel better. They improved outcomes. Hospice care and palliative treatment were areas where medieval medicine sometimes excelled. When cure wasn't possible, focus shifted to comfort, giving pain relief, providing spiritual comfort, surrounding the dying with family and community. Medieval people were familiar with death in ways modern people often aren't. They'd seen many people die. They knew how to sit with the dying, how to ease the passage, how to provide dignity when nothing else could be offered. This wasn't a medical technique you could learn from books. It was human compassion, practiced skill, cultural knowledge about how to face death. And it mattered enormously to patients and families. Public health measures beyond quarantine sometimes worked. Efforts to provide clean water, restrictions on where waste could be disposed, market regulations to prevent sale of spoiled food. These weren't based on understanding of disease transmission, but they reduced illness anyway. Medieval people understood at some level that cleanliness mattered, that garbage attracted rats and disease, that fouled water made people sick. They couldn't explain why, but they acted on the observation, not systematically, not effectively enough. Medieval cities were still filthy by modern standards, but they weren't completely ignorant of public health. Placebo effects were powerful. When a physician provided treatment with confidence, when family prayed together, when rituals were performed, patients often felt better, not because the treatments worked mechanically, but because belief itself has physiological effects. Medieval medicine was full of elaborate rituals, impressive-looking procedures, authoritative physicians wielding the weight of ancient knowledge. All of this created expectation of healing, and expectation can genuinely improve outcomes, reduce pain, speed recovery. We dismiss placebo effects as not real medicine, but they are real. The effects are measurable. Medieval medicine, whatever else it got wrong, was very good at creating powerful placebo effects. Nursing care, the actual day-to-day tending of sick people, was often excellent. Monks and nuns who staffed medieval hospitals developed real expertise in keeping patients comfortable, clean, fed, hydrated. This basic care kept many people alive who otherwise would have died. It wasn't glamorous, wasn't theoretical, just practical caretaking, changing bandages, helping with elimination, adjusting position to prevent bed sores, coaxing patients to eat and drink. Simple things that make enormous difference in recovery. Medieval nurses couldn't cure diseases, but they could nurse patients through illnesses, supporting the body while it healed itself. This is still fundamental to modern nursing. The principles haven't changed. So yes, medieval medicine failed in countless ways. Its theories were wrong. Its interventions were often harmful. Its understanding of disease was fundamentally flawed. But it wasn't all failure. Some practices helped. Some observations were accurate. Some treatments worked. The people practicing medieval medicine weren't all ignorant or foolish. Many were caring, observant, dedicated to relieving suffering. They worked with what they had, made the best decisions they could given available knowledge. And sometimes, accidentally or intentionally, they got it right. Those successes, mixed in with all the failures, kept medieval medicine going, gave physicians confidence, gave patients hope, made it possible for medical knowledge to continue accumulating until eventually, centuries later, it transformed into something effective. The journey from medieval to modern medicine wasn't a straight line from wrong to right. It was messier, Some medieval practices were better than later ones. Some knowledge was lost before being rediscovered. Progress was uneven, inconsistent, frustrating. But there was a through line of observation and care. Medieval physicians and nurses and healers were trying to help. When something worked, they kept doing it. When they noticed patterns, they adjusted practices. That basic scientific impulse, observation and adjustment, was there even in medieval times, just buried under layers of wrong theory and cultural limitations and technological constraints. But it was there. And eventually, given centuries, it grew into the scientific medicine that actually saves lives reliably. Medieval medicine's accidental victories mattered. They proved that observation-based practices could work. They kept knowledge alive through the dark periods. They provided bridges to better understanding. They deserve recognition, even as we recognize the catastrophic failures that surrounded them. Every recovery was a miracle or a mistake, and sometimes, just sometimes, it was actually good medicine accidentally working despite the theory behind it. Every person who died from medieval medicine taught us something. Every catastrophic failure was a lesson, painful and expensive, but a lesson nonetheless. Modern medicine exists because we learned from centuries of getting it wrong. That's uncomfortable to think about. It means modern medical knowledge was bought with the suffering and death of millions of people who received care that harmed them, people who trusted their physicians, who believed in treatments that killed them. Their deaths weren't pointless, but they were tragic, and we owe them acknowledgement. Let's talk about what we learned. We learned that authority isn't enough. That ancient wisdom, no matter how respected, needs to be tested against observation. Galen and Hippocrates were brilliant for their time, but treating their work as unchangeable truth prevented progress for over 1,000 years. Modern medicine operates differently. We question everything. We test. We replicate results. We demand evidence. Authority matters less than data. This shift in mindset from authority-based to evidence-based medicine came from watching authority-based medicine fail again and again, from seeing that prestigious physicians using prestigious theories killed patients just as dead as any village charlatan. We learned that good intentions don't equal good outcomes. Medieval physicians meant well. They genuinely wanted to help. But meaning well isn't enough if your methods are harmful. Modern medicine emphasizes outcomes. Does the treatment actually work? Not does it make theoretical sense, not does it seem like it should work, but does it? Show me the data. Show me the survival rates. Show me the controlled trials. This empirical focus developed because good intentions and elaborate theories proved insufficient, because patients kept dying despite physician confidence and theoretical soundness of treatment. We learned that the human body has wisdom of its own. That fever isn't always something to suppress, that symptoms are often the body's defensive response, not the disease itself, that supporting the body's natural healing processes is often more effective than aggressive intervention. Medieval medicine was very aggressive, always trying to force the body into balance, to purge and drain and correct. Modern medicine learned, slowly and painfully, that sometimes less is more, that the body can heal itself if given time and support. We learned that medicine must be humble, must acknowledge uncertainty, must be willing to say I don't know rather than making up explanations that sound good but aren't true. Medieval physicians could explain everything. Every symptom had a humoral cause. Every disease had a theoretical treatment. The problem was that these explanations were wrong. Modern medicine is comfortable with uncertainty, with admitting gaps in knowledge, with saying we're not sure why this works, but it does, or we don't have an effective treatment for this condition yet. This humility came from watching overconfident certainty lead to disaster, from realizing that false confidence kills just as surely as ignorance. We learned that dosing matters enormously, that the difference between medicine and poison is often just quantity. Medieval medicine's casual approach to dosing, a pinch of this, a handful of that, led to countless poisonings and therapeutic failures. Modern pharmacology is obsessive about dosing. Every medication has a therapeutic range. Too little, and it won't work. Too much, and it's toxic. We measure precisely. We adjust for body weight, age, kidney function, liver function. We monitor blood levels. This precision developed because imprecision killed people. Because mercury and digitalis and countless other substances proved useful in the right amounts and lethal in the wrong ones, We learned that cleanliness isn't just aesthetic, that antiseptic technique saves lives, that hand-washing between patients prevents infection transmission. Medieval medicine largely ignored cleanliness. Physicians didn't wash hands, tools weren't sterilized, wounds were dressed with dirty bandages, and patients died from infections that proper hygiene would have prevented. It took until the mid-19th century for medicine to fully accept that cleanliness mattered. Ignaz Semmelweis proved that hand-washing reduced mortality in obstetric patients. He was ridiculed and rejected by the medical establishment. His colleagues refused to believe that they were killing patients with their dirty hands. Eventually, evidence won, but only after countless deaths that could have been prevented. We learned that women's medical knowledge matters, that the empirical observations of midwives and wise women were often more accurate than the theoretical pronouncements of university-trained physicians. Medieval medicine dismissed women healers, marginalized their knowledge, persecuted them as witches, and thereby lost valuable medical insights that had been accumulated through generations of practical experience. Modern medicine, slowly and incompletely, has learned to value empirical knowledge regardless of its source, to recognize that degrees and credentials don't automatically make someone right, that observation and experience matter. We learned that disease has natural causes, that blaming illness on moral failings or divine punishment or demonic possession doesn't help anyone. That understanding biological mechanisms is the path to effective treatment. Medieval medicine mixed morality with medicine in ways that added guilt to suffering. If you were sick, maybe you deserved it. Maybe you'd sinned. Maybe demons had chosen you specifically. Modern medicine separated disease from moral judgment. You're not sick because you're bad. You're sick because you encountered a pathogen or developed a genetic condition or were exposed to a toxin. Understanding the actual cause points to actual solutions. We learned that pain management matters. That making procedures as painless as possible isn't coddling patients, it's good medicine. That reducing pain improves outcomes. Medieval medicine accepted pain as inevitable, even beneficial. Suffering was purifying. Patients were expected to endure agony stoically. Modern medicine treats pain as something to minimize. We have anesthesia for surgery, pain medications for recovery, comfort measures throughout treatment. This isn't just compassion, it's effective medicine. Patients in pain heal more slowly, have worse outcomes. We learned that mental health is health, that psychological conditions need treatment just as physical ones do, that the brain is an organ that can malfunction and that these malfunctions deserve care, not punishment. Medieval medicine treated mental illness as spiritual corruption or moral failing. Modern medicine recognizes it as biology. This shift has saved countless lives, reduced suffering enormously. We learned that observation must be systematic, that anecdotes aren't data, that we need controlled trials, statistical analysis, peer review, that our perceptions are subject to bias, and we need rigorous methods to counteract that. Medieval physicians relied on anecdote and personal observation. If one patient improved after bloodletting, that confirmed the treatment worked. They had no way to control for other variables, no way to measure outcomes rigorously. Modern research methods developed because informal observation proved unreliable, because confirmation bias is powerful, because humans are very good at seeing patterns that don't exist and missing patterns that do. We learned that medicine must evolve, that treatments should be updated as knowledge grows, that clinging to old methods because they're traditional is malpractice. Medieval medicine stayed static for centuries because tradition was valued over innovation. Modern medicine expects constant change. New treatments replace old ones. Guidelines get updated. Yesterday's standard of care becomes tomorrow's malpractice. This creates challenges, keeping up with changes, accepting that what you were taught might be wrong, but it's necessary. Medicine that doesn't evolve kills patients. We learned that access to care matters, that medicine can't just serve the wealthy, that public health, preventive care, and treating entire populations is as important as treating individuals. Medieval medicine was largely private. Physicians served those who could pay. Hospitals were charity operations, not comprehensive health systems. Most people received little or no formal medical care. Modern systems, however imperfect, recognize that population health matters, that epidemics don't respect class boundaries, that untreated disease in any community threatens all communities. We learned these lessons through failure, through watching thousands die from bloodletting, through plague years that killed millions, through mercury poisoning and surgical complications, and countless catastrophes large and small. Every medical advance represents people who died before that advance existed. Every life saved today is possible because others died yesterday, providing the knowledge we now have. This creates an obligation to continue improving, to keep questioning, to never become complacent about current practices, because future generations will look back at 21st century medicine and see failures just as we see medieval medicine's failures. We use chemotherapy that destroys healthy cells along with cancerous ones. We perform surgeries that leave lasting damage. We prescribe medications with serious side effects. Future medicine will probably do better. But we're doing the best we can with current knowledge, just as medieval physicians were. The difference is we know our knowledge is incomplete. We actively seek to improve it. We expect today's treatments to be replaced by better ones. Medieval medicine's greatest failure was stagnation, assuming knowledge was complete, resisting change, trusting authority over observation. Modern medicine's greatest strength is evolution, constant questioning, constant testing, constant improvement. That evolution cost lives, still costs lives. Every failed clinical trial, every drug that proves harmful, every surgical technique that doesn't work as hoped. These are modern equivalents of medieval failures. But we learn from them. We adjust. We move forward. Medieval medicine couldn't do that. Was trapped by its own theories and authorities and resistance to change. We can do better. Must do better. Owe it to all those who died teaching us these lessons. The price of progress was millions of lives. The responsibility that creates is to keep progressing, to honor those deaths by learning from them, by never stopping the work of improving medicine. Medieval medicine's failures weren't meaningless. They were expensive, tragic lessons that built the foundation for everything that came after. Every time a modern patient receives effective treatment, there's a direct line back through centuries of failure to the medieval patient who died teaching medicine what not to do. That's the price, that's the debt. That's why we keep trying to do better. Because they paid for our knowledge with their lives, the least we can do is use that knowledge well. Let's step back, take a breath, because we've walked through a lot of darkness together, a lot of suffering, a lot of death, a lot of well-meaning people doing terrible things to each other in the name of healing. And it would be easy to walk away from this feeling depressed, feeling like humanity is hopeless, feeling like maybe we're not as smart or advanced as we think we are. But that's not the right lesson. The right lesson is this. Look how far we've come. Look at what we've learned. Look at the world we've built on the ruins of all those failures. You woke up today in a world that medieval people would consider impossible, a world of miracles they couldn't even imagine. You have access to clean water, not just sometimes, not just if you're wealthy, just water, whenever you want it, safe to drink, delivered to your home. Medieval people died from waterborne diseases constantly. Dysentery, cholera, typhoid. They knew water could make you sick, but had no way to purify it reliably. So they drank ale and wine because fermentation killed some pathogens. You turn on a tap and drink, that's magic to them. You have antibiotics. You get an infected cut and take some pills and it heals. You get strep throat and take medicine for 10 days and you're fine. Medieval people died from infected cuts, from sore throats that turned into rheumatic fever, from abscessed teeth, from any bacterial infection because they had no way to fight bacteria. A urinary tract infection, inconvenient to you, could kill them. Slowly, painfully, inevitably. You have antibiotics. That's a miracle. You have anesthesia. You can have surgery and not feel it. You sleep through procedures that would have been unendurable torture in medieval times. You wake up with no memory of the pain. Medieval patients were conscious through amputations, through tumor removals, through bladder stone extractions. They felt everything, every cut, every burn, every moment. You have anesthesia. That's a miracle too. You have vaccines. Diseases that killed millions just vanish because we can train your immune system to fight them before you ever encounter them. Smallpox, once a global scourge that killed hundreds of millions, doesn't exist anymore. We eradicated it. Polio, which paralyzed children by the thousands, is nearly gone. Measles, mumps, rubella, diseases that killed and disabled, now rare because of vaccines. You got shots as a kid. and avoided diseases that would have killed medieval children by the millions. That's not luck, that's science. That's human beings learning from failure and building something incredible. You have imaging, X-rays that show your bones, CT scans that reveal your organs, MRIs that map your brain, ultrasounds that show babies before they're born. Medieval physicians could only guess at what was happening inside the body. They cut people open to find out, which often killed them, or they just theorized based on ancient texts. You can see inside your body without cutting, without pain, with precision that shows tumors, breaks, blockages, everything. That's not just technology, that's magic by medieval standards. You have modern surgery, sterile operating rooms, trained surgeons who've practiced for years, procedures that can fix hearts, transplant organs, reattach limbs, remove cancers, repair damage that would have been a death sentence in medieval times. Medieval surgery was last resort, often fatal, always agonizing. Modern surgery is routine, scheduled, safe enough that people choose it for quality of life improvements. That transformation took centuries, cost millions of lives, but we did it. You have dentistry. You can have your teeth fixed with minimal pain, no infection, no dying from a tooth abscess. Medieval people pulled their own teeth with pliers. No numbing, no precision. Just yank and hope the whole tooth came out. Infections were common. Deaths from tooth abscesses happened regularly. You go to a dentist, get numbed, get fixed, go home the same day. Medieval people would weep with joy at that possibility. You have childbirth that's survivable. Medieval women faced pregnancy knowing it might kill them. Many did die, from hemorrhage, from infection, from obstructed labor. Modern obstetrics isn't perfect. Women still die in childbirth, particularly in places without good healthcare access, but the survival rate is vastly higher. C-sections save lives. Blood transfusions save lives. Antibiotics prevent infections. Medieval women went into labor not knowing if they'd meet their baby or meet their death. You go into labor with reasonable confidence you'll survive. That's enormous. You have mental health treatment, therapy, medications that adjust brain chemistry, recognition that mental illness is illness, not possession or moral failing. Medieval people with depression, anxiety, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder suffered without understanding or effective help. They were restrained, exorcised, sometimes killed as witches. You can get help, real help, treatment that works. You have pain management, not just during procedures but for chronic conditions. Medications that let people with arthritis, back pain, nerve damage, cancer pain live functional lives. Medieval people just hurt, all the time, with nothing but alcohol and opium, both of which had their own problems. You have options, multiple types of pain relief, ways to manage suffering that don't destroy your life. You have insulin for diabetes. Medieval diabetics just died, slowly, miserably. No treatment existed. Now it's a manageable chronic condition. You take medicine and monitor blood sugar and live a normal life. That's a miracle. You have cancer treatments, not perfect ones, not pleasant ones, but treatments that work. Chemotherapy, radiation, immunotherapy, surgery, targeted therapies. Medieval people with cancer died, always painfully, often slowly. Medicine could do nothing except perhaps ease the suffering slightly. Now many cancers are curable, others can be managed for years. It's not ideal, but it's infinitely better than certain death. You have emergency medicine, ambulances that arrive quickly, emergency rooms with trained staff, trauma surgeons who can save people from injuries that would have been instantly fatal in medieval times. Car accidents, falls, stabbings, gunshot wounds, things that kill quickly and brutally. Modern medicine can often save people from these, not always, but often enough that it's worth trying. Medieval people died from injuries we now routinely survive. A broken leg could kill you from infection. A punctured lung meant death. Internal bleeding was hopeless. Now we have a fighting chance. You have organ transplants. Someone else's kidney can save your life. Someone's liver. Someone's heart. We can literally put organs from one person into another person and they work. Medieval people couldn't imagine this. It would seem like resurrection magic, impossible, blasphemous, but it's real. And it saves thousands of lives every year. You have all of this, and more, so much more. HIV went from death sentence to manageable chronic condition. Heart disease can be treated with medications, stents, bypass surgery. Strokes can be reversed if caught quickly enough. Premature babies survive at younger and younger gestational ages. The list goes on and on. Every medical miracle you take for granted, medieval people would have considered impossible. Divine intervention, the work of angels. But it's not divine, it's human. It's the result of centuries of learning from failure, of people who died teaching us what not to do, of researchers who kept trying despite failures, of physicians who questioned authority and trusted observation. It's science. Slow, painful, expensive science, but it works, and that's why gratitude matters. Not because you should feel guilty for what you have, not because you're ungrateful if you ever complain, but because recognizing how far we've come gives perspective. Your headache is still real and still sucks, but you can take ibuprofen and it goes away. Medieval people endured migraines for days with nothing but prayer. Your surgery is still scary and the recovery is still hard, but you sleep through it and survive it. Medieval patients were awake and often died. Your mental health struggles are still valid and still difficult, but you have access to treatment that works. Medieval people suffered with no hope of help. Gratitude doesn't erase current suffering. It contextualizes it. It reminds you that things could be worse, much worse, unimaginably worse, and it reminds you that progress is possible, that humans can solve problems, that the future might be to us what our present is to medieval people, full of miracles we can't yet imagine. Medieval medicine failed catastrophically, but it taught us how to succeed. Every death was a data point. Every failure was a lesson. Every tragedy contributed to the knowledge base that built modern medicine. Those people didn't die for nothing. They died teaching us, and we owe them the courtesy of remembering that, of appreciating what their suffering brought. When you take an antibiotic, remember the millions who died from bacterial infections because antibiotics didn't exist yet. When you have anesthesia, remember the countless people who endured surgery, conscious and in agony. When you get a vaccine, remember the children who died from diseases we've now nearly eliminated. When you complain about waiting at the doctor's office, remember that medieval people would have walked days to see a physician and paid everything they owned for treatments that didn't work. You live in an age of miracles. Not perfect medicine. We still have failures, still have diseases we can't cure, still have suffering we can't prevent. But compared to medieval medicine, compared to bloodletting and leeches and prayer as primary treatment, compared to surgery without anesthesia and infection without antibiotics and mental illness without understanding, we live in paradise. A flawed paradise. An expensive paradise. A complicated paradise where access isn't equal and treatments aren't always available to everyone who needs them. But still, paradise compared to what came before. So yes, be grateful. Not in a guilt-tripping way, but in a quiet, genuine, this is actually amazing way. Because it is amazing. What we've built, what we've learned, what we can do now that would have seemed impossible even 100 years ago, let alone in medieval times. Every pill you swallow represents centuries of research. Every procedure you undergo represents countless failed attempts before someone figured out how to do it right. Every diagnosis you receive represents millennia of observation and learning. Medieval medicine was humanity's long, painful education in how not to heal. Modern medicine is what we built with that hard-won knowledge, and it's still improving, still learning, still finding new ways to heal and help and save lives. That's the hopeful part of this dark story, that we learned, that we're still learning, that the future will be better than the present, just as the present is better than the past. Medieval people suffered, so we wouldn't have to. The least we can do is acknowledge that, appreciate it, and continue the work of making medicine better for the next generation. That's gratitude in action. Not just feeling thankful, but using that thankfulness as motivation to keep improving, to keep questioning, to keep trying to reduce suffering and extend life. Medieval medicine failed, but it was the foundation modern medicine built on, the darkness that makes our current light visible. And that matters. That's worth remembering. We've reached the end of our journey, through blood and leeches, through faith and failure, through the darkness of medieval medicine, and into the light of modern understanding. It's been heavy, hasn't it? Walking through centuries of suffering, watching people die from treatments meant to save them, seeing well-intentioned physicians make catastrophic mistakes again and again, but we made it through together. And now, as we close this final chapter, I want to leave you with something softer, something healing after all that hurt. Because the story of medieval medicine isn't just about failure. It's about humanity. It's about people facing the unfaceable with whatever tools they had. It's about courage and compassion and the stubborn human refusal to give up even when everything seems hopeless. Medieval physicians weren't monsters. They were people like you, smart, caring, doing their best with limited knowledge and impossible situations. They got up every day and tried to help, even though they were working in darkness. The midwife who delivered hundreds of babies, who held countless hands, who knew she couldn't save everyone but showed up anyway. She was a hero. The barber-surgeon who performed amputations because it was that, or watched the patient die slowly from gangrene, who worked quickly to minimize suffering, who learned his craft through terrible experience. He was trying. The wise woman who tended her herb garden and treated villagers' ailments with remedies passed down through generations, who was sometimes wrong, but often right, who cared for people no physician would see. She mattered. The physician who questioned Galen, who observed carefully, who noticed when treatments didn't work and adjusted his approach, who planted seeds of doubt that would grow into scientific medicine. He changed the world. Even the failures served a purpose. Every patient who died from bloodletting helped future physicians understand that bloodletting didn't work. Every mercury poisoning was a data point. Every surgical complication taught anatomy. Every mistake added to the accumulating knowledge that eventually transformed medicine. Medieval people were explorers in darkness. They couldn't see where they were going. They stumbled, they fell, they hurt themselves and each other, but they kept walking. And eventually, very gradually, dawn broke. That dawn is where you live, in the light they were walking toward. You benefit from their exploration, their mistakes, their suffering, and one day, someone will look back at 2025 medicine the way we look at medieval medicine. They'll see our failures, our limited understanding, our crude treatments. They'll wonder how we managed with such primitive knowledge, but hopefully they'll also see that we tried, that we cared, that we used what we had to reduce suffering and extend life. That we kept learning, kept questioning, kept improving. That's the legacy medieval medicine leaves us. Not their specific practices, most of which were wrong, but their commitment to healing, their refusal to give up, their determination to help even when they didn't know how. Modern medicine inherits that spirit. We've added knowledge, science, technology, evidence-based practices, but the core mission remains the same. Relieve suffering, heal when possible, comfort when cure isn't available. Medieval physicians would be astounded at what we can do now, but they'd recognize the mission. They'd understand the commitment. They'd see themselves in us, and we should see ourselves in them. Flawed, limited, doing our best, making mistakes, learning from failures, trying again. That's humanity. That's medicine. That's the long arc from medieval bloodletting to modern miracles. It's not a story of stupid people becoming smart. It's a story of people gradually accumulating knowledge through painful experience. We're part of that story. We're not at the end. We're just in a brighter part of the journey than our ancestors were. But we're still walking, still learning, still making mistakes and trying to do better. So as you go about your life carrying this knowledge, remembering these stories, here's what I hope you take away. Appreciate what you have. The medicine available to you, imperfect as it is, represents the work of countless generations. It's built on suffering and learning and stubborn human determination. It's precious. Be patient with failure. Medicine still fails. We still lose patients. Still struggle with diseases we don't understand. But we're learning. Just like medieval physicians learned, even if slowly. Support medical research. Because the only way forward is continued investigation, continued questioning, continued willingness to challenge assumptions and test new ideas. Treat medical professionals with respect. They're human, they make mistakes, but they're also standing in a long tradition of people who dedicated their lives to healing. That deserves recognition. Remember that progress is slow. Medical breakthroughs seem sudden, but they're usually built on decades of preliminary work. Be patient with the process. Value both science and compassion. Medieval medicine often had compassion without effective science. Modern medicine sometimes has science without enough compassion. We need both. Stay humble. We don't know everything. Future generations will see our ignorance clearly. That's okay. It's part of being human. And maybe most importantly, when you're in a doctor's office or taking medication or recovering from a procedure, take just a moment to recognize the miracle of it. You're receiving care that's effective. That's based on evidence. That actually works. That would seem like divine intervention to someone living in medieval times. You're fortunate, privileged, lucky to live now instead of then. Not because life is easy now. It's not. You still suffer, still struggle, still face illness and injury and all the challenges of being human, but you face them with tools, with knowledge, with treatments that actually help instead of harm. That's the gift medieval medicine gave us through its failures. The knowledge of what not to do, the foundation that better practices were built on, the long dark night that makes our current dawn so bright. So tonight, when you go to bed in your clean sheets, in your climate-controlled home, with your medicine cabinet full of effective treatments just in case you need them, maybe whisper a quiet thank you to the medieval physicians who tried despite not knowing, to the patients who suffered teaching us lessons, to the wise women who kept knowledge alive, to the skeptics who questioned authority, to everyone who contributed to the long journey from bloodletting to antibiotics. They walked through darkness so we could walk in light. They endured so we wouldn't have to. They failed so we could succeed. Their story is sad, often horrific, filled with unnecessary suffering and preventable deaths. But it's also hopeful, because it proves humans can learn, can improve, can build something better on the ruins of what came before. Medieval medicine was terrible, but it led to something wonderful. The current state of medical care, imperfect as it is, miraculous as it would seem to our ancestors, and our medicine, with all its current limitations, will lead to something even better. Future generations standing on our shoulders, learning from our failures, building higher. That's the real story here, not medieval versus modern, but humanity's long climb toward understanding, toward healing, toward reducing suffering and extending life. It's a climb that's still happening, that will continue long after we're gone, that connects us backward to medieval physicians and forward to future healers we can't imagine. We're all part of the same story, the same journey from darkness toward light, from ignorance toward knowledge, from helplessness toward capability. Medieval medicine reminds us where we came from. Modern medicine shows us where we are. And both together hint at where we're going. Somewhere better, somewhere brighter, somewhere our medieval ancestors would consider paradise, and our descendants will consider primitive, but all connected. All part of humanity's stubborn, heroic, flawed, and beautiful attempt to heal itself. So sleep well tonight. You've earned it. You've walked through the darkness with me, witnessed centuries of suffering, learned from ages of failure. Now rest, heal, appreciate what you have. And tomorrow, carry forward the knowledge that progress is possible, that learning from mistakes works, that humans, for all our flaws, can build miracles on the ruins of our failures. Medieval medicine died so modern medicine could be born. The long night ended, dawn broke, and you're living in the light of that dawn, surrounded by miracles your ancestors couldn't imagine. If this journey through blood and faith and failure has made you think, has changed your perspective even slightly, has helped you appreciate the world you live in, then it was worth taking. Leave a comment if you want. Tell me where you are, what time it is, what moment hit you hardest, what you'll remember. But mostly, just remember to be grateful, to recognize miracles when you're living inside them, to appreciate how far humanity has traveled, because the night was long, the darkness was deep, the suffering was real, but dawn came, as it always does, as it always will, and that's worth celebrating. Thank you for walking through the darkness with me, for listening, for learning, for being willing to face uncomfortable truths about our past. Now go live in the light we've built together. Use the medicine that works. Appreciate the knowledge we've gained, and carry forward the determination to keep improving. The story continues, and you're part of it. Sleep well. You're safe. You're cared for. You live in an age of miracles, and medieval physicians, looking down through history, are proud of what we've built on their hard-won lessons. The long night has ended, the dawn is beautiful, and the future is still being written. Until next time, rest easy. You've earned it. Easy.